Chapter 17. Chapter 17, The Ghastful Speed of Improvement. Nine Wolves Mountain was 15 kilometers away from the county, and it took Jian Wushuang half a day to get there. He spent a long time trying to find the cave in the north rift of the mountain. It's that cave. Standing at the top of a big tree, Jian Wushuang could see a cave at the bottom of the rift. Not far from the cave was a huge monster. Its breathing sounded rhythmically from its nose. Is that a bloody lion? Jian Wushuang stared at the huge monster, unable to look away. Bai Chong had mentioned that the cave with primordial spiritual liquid was the territory of a bloody lion at the peak of the sixth realm. A monster at the peak of that realm could match a warrior at the peak of the sixth step of spirit path. Some spirit beasts had innate advantages, so when they battled human beings, they were stronger. The spirit beasts are born to hate human beings, and their territorial awareness is extremely strong. If I want to get into that cave, I have no choice but to kill the bloody lion. So let's fight. Jian Wushuang's eyes were like lightning. Like an eagle preying on its food, he leapt down from the treetop. Long sword on his back was unsheathed at the same time. The sound of his sword echoed in the rift, as Jian Wushuang rushed violently towards the bloody lion. Bloody lion. Jian Wushuang's eyes were full of battle intent. Human being. Bloody lion woke up with a start, and a pair of dark gold eyes burst out with cold killing intent. With an angry roar, it charged ferociously at Jian Wushuang. The battle surprisingly finished in just an instant. Jian Wushuang sheathed his bloody long sword and looked at bloody lion on the ground. Blood oozed from the deep sword scar in its neck. Many sword scars of different sizes were spread all over its body. It was dead now. According to convention, at the peak of the sixth realm, the bloody lion was powerful enough to defeat human beings at peak of the sixth step of the spirit path. However, this was only the case with normal human warriors. Once it encountered human warriors who mastered excellent martial arts techniques, not only could it not defeat them, it would be totally defeated by them. Jian Wushuang's swordsmanship could overwhelm the whole Sword Marquis mansion, so killing a bloody lion was rather easy. Ignoring the bloody lion's corpse, Jian Wushuang stepped into the cave. It was deep and its path was very narrow. However, when he went through the small entranceway, he found it was quite different from the outside. The interior of the cave was quite refined. There was a stone table, bench, and bed. It appeared that someone had once lived here. As he entered further into the cave, he found that the pond emitted a faint scent. The diameter of the pond was 3 meters or less. It belonged to a small creature. However, as soon as Jian Wushuang noticed the pond, his eyes were full of wild excitement. Primordial spiritual liquid. Jian Wushuang looked at the fragrant and nearly transparent water in the pond eagerly. He could feel the pure power contained in the water. There was no doubt this pond water truly was the invaluable primordial spiritual liquid. The whole pond. Jian Wushuang jumped into the pond. The moment he entered the pond, he found that although it was not long in diameter, it was very deep, at least 10 meters. Such a large pond. All this water is primordial spiritual liquid. I wonder how much there is. Jian Wushuang thought in excitement. Primordial spiritual liquid was the purest spiritual liquid. It contained almost no impurities. For warriors following the spirit path, it was much stronger than spirit cultivating pills. Primordial spiritual liquid formed naturally, so very few people could use large quantities of it to improve their cultivation. But now there was a whole pond. If the water was divided into drops, how many would it be? What would the value be? No doubt it was very high. Sir Bai Chong has given me such an amazing opportunity. Trembling slightly with anticipation, Jian Wushuang was extremely grateful. Without hesitation, Jian Wushuang began to cultivate in the pond. By cultivating in the pond, he could absorb the primordial spiritual liquid surrounding him and turn it into spiritual power. For an ordinary warrior, it would take a considerable amount of time to absorb all the primordial spiritual liquid in the pond, but Jian Wushuang was different. Heavenly creation skill greatly defied the natural order. The first-class spirit cultivating pill he'd taken earlier contained such toxicity that it would take ordinary warriors 1 or 2 months to absorb it. However, Jian Wushuang had completely absorbed the pill in just 1 night. It was the same with the primordial spiritual liquid. As Jian Wushuang started to practice heavenly creation skill, the power of his cultivation method immediately manifested itself. An overbearing power was erupting out from his body, forcefully absorbing everything nearby. The primordial spiritual liquid in the pond was the first to be absorbed. It flooded into Jian Wushuang's pores at an amazing speed. It was like a huge black hole, consuming everything, crazy and overwhelming. How horrifying was the absorption speed. As primordial spiritual liquid flooded into his body, it was changed into spiritual power, by using the heavenly creation skill. With this process of absorption and change, the steadily increasing speed of his spiritual power could be regarded as terrifying. It is too fast. The increase of my spiritual power is too fast and terrifying. Jian Wushuang was shocked at himself. His mind was muddled and he could not believe it. Because the speed was too frightening. In fact, all this was natural. Primordial spiritual liquid combined with heavenly creation skill, which defied the heavens, was truly overwhelming and terrifying. Just like the first-class spirit cultivating pill he'd taken before, for warriors, primordial spiritual liquid's function was much stronger than spirit cultivating pills. The Pan's primordial spiritual liquid was equal to 10 first-class spirit cultivating pills. Therefore, the increasing speed of his spiritual power was naturally beyond imagination. In just half a day, Jian Wushuang found his spiritual power had reached peak of the sixth heaven of divine path. It had only taken half a day. It seemed that the pond had not reduced much in primordial spiritual liquid from this half-day of absorption. Over the next few days, Jian Wushuang focused fully on cultivating and didn't tell anyone about the terrifying improvement of his strength. Time seemed to pass slowly, yet 20 days went by in the blink of an eye. In the pond, the water level was decreasing. Jian Wushuang remained in the pond, as some primordial spiritual liquid was still flowing into his body. Finally, as the last drop of primordial spiritual liquid was absorbed, the huge pond had disappeared completely. Jian Wushuang, who had been indulging in his cultivation, suddenly opened his eyes. A terrifying flash burst out from his eyes. Chapter 18. Chapter 18, The Breakthrough. From the bottom of the pond, Jian Wushuang stood up slowly. All his muscles and joints crackled as he rose. He stretched and took a great leap to the entrance of the cave. Jian Wushuang looked at the wall of the mountain ahead of him with his sparkling eyes. A sudden clenching of his right hand made an explosive force burst out instantly from the mountain. Bang! The tremendous sound echoed through the cave. Jian Wushuang looked at the large hole in the wall in front of him. His eyes were bright. Not only did I reach the eighth heaven of divine path, I reached the peak. Clenching his fists in excitement, he could feel the surging power contained in his hands. Jian Wushuang had spent 20 days cultivating in this cave, absorbing every drop of primordial spiritual liquid from the pond. It had contained a huge quantity of pure spiritual power, which he had absorbed completely and transformed into spiritual power. As a result, his strength had improved to an amazing state. Not long ago he had been at the sixth heaven of divine path, close to the peak. But today, a series of breakthroughs had brought him to the seventh heaven of divine path, then the eighth heaven of divine path. He had skyrocketed to the peak of the eighth heaven of divine path. It was an explosive breakthrough. But everything happened in a systematic manner. After all, not everyone had access to such a vast amount of primordial spiritual liquid to help with his cultivation, let alone heavenly creation skill, heaven-defying cultivation method. His marvelous breakthrough was attributed to the primordial spiritual liquid and the heavenly creation skill. The eighth heaven of divine path was equivalent to the initial spiritual sea realm for an ordinary warrior. One who reached the peak of the eighth heaven of divine path had the same power as one at the peak of the initial spiritual sea realm. So spiritual power operated with the strength advantage of heavenly creation skill, could be equivalent to the profound spiritual sea realm. Perhaps it was slightly lower but not by much. A stunning light burst out from Jian Wushuang's eyes. "Jian Meng'er, I am gaining on you," Jian Wushuang roared. Jian Meng'er had cultivated to the profound spiritual sea realm. Although he had not solidified his cultivation, he had his heaven-defying heavenly creation skill, spiritual power, and so on. It meant that compared with Jian Meng'er, he was almost as strong as her. He had only needed 2 months to catch up to her. 10 days. There are still 10 days before the battle. With his eyes squinting, Jian Wushuang thought, I should take my time. I have gained battle strength similar to the profound spiritual sea realm and have a great chance of defeating Jian Meng'er in battle. However, I still need to prepare a certain trump card for myself, just in case. Thinking about a trump card, the first thing that came to his mind was the secret skill recorded in Heavenly Creation Skill. Soul-devouring secret skill. It was an extremely powerful secret skill that defied the heavens. Along with Heavenly Creation Skill, he was deeply impressed with this secret skill. It was impossible to forget. When Jian Wushuang thought about this secret skill, he was shocked. It was so powerful that he thought it harmed natural harmony. Furthermore, it inflicted damage on the person who exercised it. Nobody was willing to use it unless it was really an emergency. It did not make sense to use such a secret skill as the trump card. Soul-devouring secret skill contains 3 scrolls. In my present realm, I can only try the first one at most. I can't even consider the second and third one right now. With a smile, Jian Wushuang started studying this skill. It took him a total of 5 days. 5 days later, Jian Wushuang was in the north rift of Nine Wolves Mountain, sitting cross-legged in a glade. Let's do it. He took a deep breath and started practicing soul-devouring secret skill. He spent 5 days studying. He was able to grasp the first scroll of the skill, but it had taken a considerable amount of time to carry out. He knew well the harm the skill could cause him, so he was very careful when putting it to use. He didn't dare to be sloppy. The secret skill, it devours one's soul. As he cultivated the secret skill, there was a buzzing sound. It even shocked the void. Jian Wushuang's body seemed like a giant black hole, into which there were constant peculiar forces flooding in at an amazing speed. These forces were so complex and diverse that Jian Wushuang had difficulty identifying them. But he found that with the infusion of these forces, his cultivation was booming. He had already been at the 8th heaven of divine path before, but this wild infusion of forces pushed his cultivation to a higher level. A single moment was enough to make a breakthrough from the 8th heaven. The 9th heaven of the divine path. His power continued to rise even after he reached the 9th heaven of the divine path. Suddenly, there was a sharp surge of pain in his heart. It became more intense with the rise of his cultivation. Stop it now. Jian Wushuang was clenching his teeth. His face was distorted. Feeling the sharp pain, he stopped the operation promptly. As soon as the secret skill stopped, his increasing cultivation ceased. The pain began to weaken. Even so, the spasms in his body did not diminish right away. Lying on the glade, Jian Wushuang closed his eyes. He was gasping for breath and looked very weak. It was a long time before he opened his eyes. Soul-devouring secret skill, it really is a secret skill that devours the soul? Jian Wushuang couldn't help shaking his head. It really hurt. It was harmful to practice this skill. He had spared some effort because he didn't push his cultivation to its full extent. However, he still felt extreme pain. If he had exercised it to the full degree, it would be more painful. The soul-devouring secret skill really causes a surge in my cultivation in a short time, but it hurts me even more, Jian Wushuang said to himself. It was one's essence, qi and spirit, rather than their spiritual power, that the soul-devouring secret skill harmed. If it only consumed large quantities of spiritual power, he would not care at all. Heavenly creation skill, after all, helped him to recover spiritual power quickly. As for the essence, qi and spirit, however, even heavenly creation skill could make no difference. Jian Wushuang shook his head and looked up. He wore a weird expression. Jian Wushuang stared at everything around him in amazement. He realized the earth within dozens of meters around him had become lifeless. The earth, which had been dark green before, was now yellow and full of cracks. The flowers, grass and trees were withering away. The ground with dozens of meters around him had died in the twinkling of an eye. Chapter 19. Chapter 19. The Gathering of All Parties. With his eyes wide open, Jian Wushuang stared at his surroundings in wonder. A dozen-meter radius where the earth was a lifeless land of death. Further away from the circle, the land was green and vibrant. It was at this exact moment that Jian Wushuang understood how the soul-devouring secret skill had been named. It devoured the soul. What was soul-devouring? The skill would take the soul of the earth, creatures and nature. He understood what the strange and intricate power flowing into his body just now had been. It had been the natural power of the nearby creatures. The soul-devouring secret skill worked by taking the power of all living beings within reach and keeping them for his own use. This skill really is horrible. Unless it is absolutely necessary, I will never use it again. Jian Wushuang warned himself. After this first taste, Jian Wushuang dared not to try it again. Instead, he continued to study the detailed steps of carrying out the skill. 3 days later, Jian Wushuang was in the creek in the very middle of Nine Wolves Mountain. He cupped his hands to drink from the creek and then stood up. It is the end of the month and I am only 2 days away from the battle. It is time to go back now. Jian Wushuang looked at the endless sky above him. He smiled and jumped up into the air, then headed in the direction of Sword Marquee Mansion. In the early morning, dawn was just breaking. In Sword Marquee Mansion, when the first blush of the rising sun from the far horizon began to light the earth, everyone fell into an uproar. The disciples and tribesmen of the mansion poured out from each building and gathered in the drill ground at the center of the Marquis's mansion. Each party and tribe of the whole Bahui Commandery, as well as those from Sword Marquee Mansion, had dispatched their experts to Sword Marquee Mansion. Today the annual Sword Marquee Token battle was being held in the mansion. Actually, the so-called Sword Marquee Token was only a title for the strongest person among the youth. An expert would grow up and eventually advance, so the Sword Marquee Mansion attached great importance to the cultivation of young disciples. Every year, Sword Marquee Mansion invited all the parties and tribes of the commandery to watch the battle. Under normal circumstances, an invitation from Sword Marquee Mansion, the top most recognized power in Bahui Commandery, would not be refused by any party. This year was no exception. The Sword Marquee Token battle was of special significance, especially this year. It was universally acknowledged in Bahui Commandery that there was a rare super genius in Sword Marquee Mansion. This super genius was only 16 and had already reached the profound spiritual sea realm. What's more, her swordsmanship was unfathomable. Such a young girl was going to take charge of the sword pavilion, which enjoyed a significant position in the mansion. Her deeds made every prominent person in Bahui Commandery full of curiosity and expectation. And this exceptional genius was of course Jian Meng'er, the god's chosen daughter in the Sword Marquee Mansion. It was the perfect time for Jian Meng'er to flex her muscle in front of all the experts and to shoot for fame. After today, the sword pavilion would officially be in Jian Meng'er's charge. She would be the one crowned in the mansion. A great number of people had already swarmed into the wide drill ground. There were 2 platforms. One was used as the ring for disciples to show their strength, while the other one was the stands for the audience. Jian Xinhong, the current Sword Marquee Mansion master, was seated in a chair, having a casual conversation with several great personages who sat by him. Since these people could sit side by side with the mansion master, one could infer that their background was not normal. Look. That must be Situ Qingyue, the master of tribe Situ. That's Yi Xiu, the master of tribe Yi. Their family also focuses on swordsmanship. However, compared with our Sword Marquee Mansion, they are far worse. It is unexpected that this Sir Bai Chong, the mysterious supervisor of the gladiator arena, would come. A lot of disciples of the mansion were carefully discussing many things around the drill ground. They fixed their eyes on the stands from time to time to have a good look at these famous experts whom they seldom saw. The Situ and Yi tribes enjoyed a little less power and position than Sword Marquee Mansion, but the gap was narrow. As for the gladiator arena, it boasted great strength. In addition, the arena held an aloof position and didn't participate in the conflicts. Even the mansion master, Jian Xinhong, was wary of Bai Chong. Mr. Bai Chong, it is really a surprise that you have come to the Sword Marquee Token battle personally this year. In recent years, you often sent a gold-robed servant from the gladiator arena on your behalf, said Situ Qingyue while wearing a smile. It is a great honor for me in the mansion that Mr. Bai Chong has chosen to participate in this battle in person, said Jian Xinhong. This battle is much different from those before. It is normal that I should come in person. I am also curious about this exceptional genius and want to see exactly how talented she is, Bai Chong replied with a smile. Trust me, she won't let you down, Jian Xinhong said and laughed, showing his confidence in Jian Meng'er. Really? Bai Chong lifted his eyebrows. He laughed uncannily but didn't say anything more. Looking around the drill ground, he immediately noticed Jian Wushuang in a corner. He was leaning against the wall with his eyes closed. Bai Chong could not help smiling. The little boy is so calm. I wonder whether his strength has improved since the journey through Nine Wolves Mountain. Bai Chong was quite concerned for Jian Wushuang because of his friendship with Jian Nantian. He had provided Jian Wushuang with the opportunity to gain a whole pond of primordial spiritual liquid. His consideration for Jian Wushuang could be seen from what he had done. He had come mostly because of Jian Wushuang. It's almost time. Let's start, Jian Xinhong said on the platform. Jian Lan, who stood close to Jian Xinhong, nodded his head gently. Then he took a few steps and came to the very center of the platform. He cleared his throat and said, "Attention! Would all of the disciples participating in this battle, please come up." As the great elder of the Redley Martial Hall, Jian Lan was supposed to host the Sword Marquee Token battle this time. There was a disturbance in the drill ground. The young disciples who had acquired their position in the battle by getting through the 5th level of the trial tower went to the center of the ground. They hustled and bustled. There were a good dozen young disciples at first sight, all of whom were geniuses in the Sword Marquis mansion, including Jian Wushuang. At the same time, a beautiful white figure was walking slowly towards them. Suddenly, everyone on the drill ground gave their full attention to her. Not only the disciples on the ground, even the personages on the platform turned their gaze to this white figure. As the god's chosen daughter in Sword Marquis mansion, disciples in the mansion adored Jian Meng'er as if she was a goddess. She was so beautiful, along with her cultivation and even her gift in sword principle. She had one great admiration. Chapter 20. Chapter 20, Tianyuan Sword Sect. Jian Meng'er stepped forward, looking like an untouchable goddess, meant to be worshipped by the masses with her beautiful and aloof appearance. Her every move attracted the attention of those around her. Jian Meng'er, 16, profound spiritual sea realm. She had already mastered the 18 first-class sword arts of the Sword Pavilion. Based on her current speed, she'll likely reach the Gold Core realm before she turns 20. A 20-year-old Gold Core realm expert? My God. Many disciples of Sword Marquis Mansion near the drill ground couldn't help sighing with emotion when they saw this extraordinary beauty. The realms were ranked as such: the 7 steps of the Spirit Path, transforming sea from spiritual power, and finally, Primordial Gold Core. The Primordial Gold Core realm was the strongest, and there was only one Gold Core realm expert in Sword Marquis Mansion. He was the mansion master Jian Xinhong. And what did a person who became an expert of the Golden Core realm before the age of 20 represent? Blinding strength. She's such an exceptional genius that we can't even muster the slightest motivation to compete with her. She's a peerless genius that can only be seen once in a lifetime in Sword Marquis Mansion. No wonder she has hopes of becoming the new Sword Pavilion master at such a young age. No one can hold a candle to such an exceptional genius in the entire Bahui Commandery, never mind the Sword Marquis Mansion. Even those famous experts on the grandstand were staring at Jian Meng'er with gleaming eyes. Nearly all were here for her, except for Bai Chong and a few others. The eye-catching and aloof girl made a beeline for Jian Wushuang, who stood amid the crowd. She spoke without emotion. Jian Wushuang, I heard you finally condensed your spiritual power and became a warrior. Congratulations. Turning his head, Jian Wushuang gave her a cold glance and said nothing. She wasn't angry. You've become a warrior and even achieve a breakthrough into the 6th step of the Spirit Path in such a short time. That's admittedly terrific. But you can't hope to close the gap in our strength in just 2 months. I advise you not to challenge me today. Don't challenge you? He sneered. This battle is unavoidable ever since you and your father started coveting the position of Sword Pavilion Master 2 months ago. Stubborn. But you've always been this way. She was still indifferent. I know you bear resentment in your heart, but there's an unbridgeable gap between us. Why must you come and seek humiliation? Seek humiliation? You really do think very highly of yourself. Have it your way. You can't blame me later when you're the one not accepting my advice. I'll show you the full extent of my strength and snip that impossibly stupid idea you have in the bud, she said coolly. I'll be looking forward to it. Jian Meng'er ended the conversation and stood casually in the center of the drill ground. Though she was surrounded by many young geniuses of the Sword Marquis Mansion, they might as well be invisible compared to her. She was like a crane standing among chickens, attracting attention with every move she made. For example, everyone had noticed the brief conversation between her and Jian Wushuang. Jian Meng'er is talking to Jian Wushuang. What is she saying? Earlier they spoke in very quiet voices. Coupled with the noise in the drill ground, no one except the talented disciples close to them heard their conversation. They became very curious about it. I heard that Jian Wushuang made a blood oath 2 months ago to battle it out with Jian Meng'er today. I heard that too. This guy is really overreaching himself. How dare he challenge Jian Meng'er? Who among us young disciples of Sword Marquis Mansion has the right to challenge this god's chosen daughter? Jian Wushuang is just trash who condensed his spiritual power 2 months ago. How dare he? That's not exactly true. He may have condensed his spiritual power very late, but he spent only a month to break through the 6th step of the Spirit Path. His cultivating speed is unbelievable. So what? He's merely at the 6th step of the Spirit Path. A month has passed since then. Are you suggesting he has broken through the seventh step of the spirit path or the spiritual sea realm and is on par with Jian Menger? What a joke. That's true. All of them began looking down on him. On the drill ground, there was another person who was paying special attention to Jian Wushuang. It was Jian Lin. 1 month ago Jian Wushuang defeated him, and badly at that. He had been harboring deep resentment since then, and today was his chance to avenge himself. He held his hands firmly together, repeating Jian Wushuang's name in his mind. The young disciples who had passed the 5th story of the trial tower gathered in the middle of the drill ground. Just as Jian Lan was getting ready to announce the start of the battle, 2 people showed up nearby. What? The famous experts on the grandstand noticed the newcomers immediately and instantly looked at them with sharp eyes. Even the languid Bai Chong couldn't help glancing at them. Primordial gold core. Not only that, the peak of the gold core realm. The famous experts were all awed. Those with primordial gold cores were definitely top-notch experts in the Bahui Commandery. Everyone with the right to sit in the grandstand had all achieved that level, but most had only reached the initial gold core realm, with Jian Xinhong being stronger than most. But although he had reached the profound gold core realm, he still had a long way to go before he would achieve the peak of the gold core realm. Among those present, there was only one who had the possibility of reaching the peak of the gold core realm. That was Bai Chong, and that was merely a possibility, not a certainty. He hardly ever fought with others, so no one knew about his true condition. Now, the leader of the 2 newcomers was evidently a peak gold core realm expert. It's her? Bai Chong was stunned, recognizing the newcomer. Sir Bai Chong, you know her? Jian Xinhong promptly asked. Yes. Bai Chong nodded. It's Shui Hanxin, the 9th elder of the Tianyuan sword sect. She reached the peak of the gold core realm 10 years ago. Tianyuan sword sect. And an elder at that. Everyone on the grandstand was shocked. They were all famous experts in the Bahui Commandery with vast knowledge. They naturally knew about the Tianyuan sword sect. The Tianyuan sword sect was one of the 5 sects in the Tianyin province. It was said that there were quite a few experts in that sect who had reached the Yin-Yang Void realm, and there were even more experts in the Gold Core realm. In the entire Tianyin province, the sect was doubtlessly a strong influence and a true top sect. These experts in the Bahui Commandery, even the most powerful Sword Marquis Mansion, were nothing compared to the Tianyuan sword sect. After all, their commandery was only one out of the 108 commanderies in the Tianyin province. An elder of the sect, no matter their identity or strength, was enough to incite awe in these famous experts. They began wondering why an elder of the Tianyuan sword sect would come to Sword Marquis Mansion. Just then Jian Lan, who was also on the grandstand, said proudly, "Don't worry everyone. Elder Shui is here especially for my daughter." The famous experts looked stunned. In the middle of the drill ground, Jian Menger, who had been drawing attention all along, was already walking toward the newcomers. Chapter 21. Chapter 21, The Chosen One. Great Master. The way Jian Menger respectfully addressed the woman fully illustrated the nature of their relationship. Shui Hanxin nodded, turning her gaze to the grandstand. "I didn't expect you'd also be here, mister." Bai Chong. "Elder Shui, it's been so long since we last met. Have you been well?" Bai Chong's reply appeared to be rather stiff. "Haha, the arrival of Elder Shui of the Tianyuan sword sect brings light to our humble Sword Marquis Mansion." Jian Xinhong stood up with a face full of smiles. The other famous experts on the grandstand followed his cue and made their greetings. They had to be humble in the face of the eminent status of an elder of Tianyuan sword sect. Bai Chong's eyes flickered as he stared at Shui Hanxin. He was the only one who did not get up to greet her. "You're all too courteous," she said, smiling faintly. Then Shui Hanxin climbed onto the arena. A servant from Sword Marquis Mansion prepared a seat for her immediately. The grim-looking young man following Shui Hanxin chose to stand quietly by her side. "Elder Shui, is that girl your disciple?" Bai Chong casually asked. "You're right." Shui Hanxin nodded. "I accepted her as a personal disciple 2 years ago. This time, I'm actually here to bring her back to cultivate in the Tianyuan sword sect." Personal disciple. Cultivate in Tianyuan sword sect. Everyone on the grandstand all sucked in a breath. It was the one and only Tianyuan sword sect. For Jian Menger to enter such a sect and be accepted as a personal disciple by an elder, it only meant she was destined for a great future. Not to mention, it spoke volumes about her incredible talent. This raised an uproar on the drill ground. Tianyuan Sword Sect. Jian Ming'er was accepted as a personal disciple by an elder of the Tianyuan Sword Sect. To begin with, she's already so strong. Now that she'll be cultivating in the Tianyuan Sword Sect, her future is a promising one. Looks like our Sword Marquis mansion will be welcoming another expert very soon. She might even be stronger than the mansion master. Numerous eyes were fixed on Jian Ming'er. She, who was already eye-catching in the first place, became even more dazzling under the attention. Before, her innate talent was already enough to make others despair. She was now even more perfect as the personal disciple of an elder of the Tianyuan Sword Sect. No one would dare to question any of her future achievements. She was truly God's chosen daughter. Tianyuan Sword Sect? Jian Wushuang squinted but did not say anything else. On the grandstand, Jian Lan was in high spirits and said, "Let's start our battle today." The annual Sword Marquis token battle had begun. This battle was divided into 2 rounds. First was martial arts technique, followed by cultivation of spiritual power. Of course, this battle was not meant to be a duel. It was enough as long as everyone demonstrated their strongest martial arts technique and cultivation of spiritual power. Come forward one by one according to the number you received in the lottery. Jian Lan shouted. First, Jian Lin. Everyone on the drill ground immediately focused their attention on Jian Lin. Jian Lin's the first one while I'm the last one. Jian Wushuang looked at the number 38 on his ticket from the lottery. There were exactly 38 youngsters taking part in this battle, so he was the last one. Under everyone's eyes, Jian Lin took a deep breath and slowly walked forward to the arena. "Show us your strongest martial arts technique, or what you're most skilled in," Jian Lan said. "I understand." Jian Lin nodded and started to demonstrate his martial arts technique. Roar. A giant tiger, entirely conjured from spiritual power, materialized in front of him, roaring loudly. Tiger Roaring Fist. It was Jian Lin's strongest as well as most skilled technique. Swift and violent, this move was also full of power and might. Amazing! What an overbearing punch! Exclamations soon resounded around the drill ground. Not bad. You can leave now, Jian Lan ordered, glancing at Jian Lin, who had slowly returned to a neutral posture. Jian Lin nodded and slowly walked down from the arena under the eyes of everyone. He glanced at Jian Wushuang at the same time, feeling nervous after seeing his poker face. He was pretty happy with his performance today. But he had used his Tiger Roaring Fist and still lost to Jian Wushuang a month ago. That experience had inevitably left him with some trauma. Next, Jian Xiu. The disciples all went up to the arena to demonstrate their best martial arts techniques, one by one. Many of them chose to show off their swordsmanship. They were pretty good to have such levels in the spirit path, but it was difficult for them to leave an impression on the famous experts in the audience. Next, Jian Ming'er. When Jian Lan read his daughter's name, he deliberately made his voice sound impassioned. Excitement immediately swept everyone on the drill ground, including the famous experts on the grandstand. They all fixed their gazes on her. They had high expectations for this chosen daughter. Dressed in white, Jian Ming'er walked up to the arena. She first bowed to those on the grandstand before beginning her swordsmanship demonstration. Whoosh! The unsheathing of her sword edge caused a piercing sword echo to resound through the drill ground. The sword echo carried a faint trace of killing intent, coming from the first-class killing sword, the triple kill sword from the Marquis's mansion. Swish! The waving sword light was so gentle that it gave the onlookers the feeling of drifting in the ocean. The wave superposition sword art. The moment Jian Ming'er demonstrated this sword art, everyone immediately recognized what it was. Interesting. Out of the 18 first-class 18 sword arts of Sword Pavilion, she chose this one. Looks like she's very confident, Bai Chong said, smiling. You seem to understand this sword art very well, Shui Hingson casually noted. Just barely, Bai Chong replied. It's only a first-class sword art, but if you can utilize it to the end, its power can surpass that of first-class sword arts. Oh. The rest of the people on the grandstand became interested. Jian Xinhong, you're the Sword Marquis Mansion Master. You should be the one most familiar with this sword art. Why don't you explain it? Bai Chong threw the responsibility of answering to Jian Xinhong. Mr. Bai Chong, you're right. Jian Xinhong immediately gave his explanation. Though this kind of sword art is just one of the 18 first-class sword arts of Sword Pavilion, it's quite a special one. If you show the sword art in its entirety, its power is no less than those legendary superclass sword arts. It's called the wave superposition sword art because the user can accumulate the power of the sword art as they continue to use it. There's actually only one true movement to this sword art, and that's the splitting technique. It's very simple, just splitting. But the splitting process will pile up. The power superimposes on one another and ends up becoming greater. This way, the sword art naturally becomes more powerful and finally surpasses the level of first-class sword arts. Chapter 22. Chapter 22, Wave Superposition Sword Art. The power of the sword art will stack. Several famous experts on the stand could not help being moved. Situ Qingyue continued, this kind of sword art requires a strict application of power. Indeed. Jian Xinhong nodded. The wave superposition sword's art needs to constantly store power so it can be even stronger. Under normal circumstances, if the power can be overlapped 7 times, that is, if the user can demonstrate 7 moves, the sword art will have reached the profound level. This sword art requires 7 moves to reach the profound level. Let's see how many moves this exceptional genius from Sword Marquee Mansion can perform. Situ Qingyue smiled. Everyone was looking forward to her performance. On the arena, Jian Minger's swordsmanship was incredibly smooth, stacking wave after wave. She made her first sword move without an ounce of hesitation. The second, third, and fourth moves were also instantaneous. The fifth, sixth, and seventh quickly followed. The process was smooth without any pause. The spectators could clearly see the power of Jian Minger's sword art become stronger and stronger. That was the result of the power superposing on one another. However, when it came to her 7th sword move, there was no uproar in the drill ground. To use 7 moves, achieving the profound level in the wave superposition sword art, was nothing impressive. However, after the 7th sword move, she adjusted her wrist. Ha! With a cry, she demonstrated the 8th sword move. The sword art had been superposed 8 times and its power had exceeded the limits of first-class sword arts. It's the 8th sword move. Exclamations resounded throughout the drill ground. 7 moves would lead to the profound level of the wave superposition sword's art, while the 8th move meant the sword art reached the exceptional level. She's still not done yet, Jian Xinhong said excitedly on the grandstand. Sure enough, Jian Minger did not stop after making her 8th sword move. She was still accumulating power. Is she going to try for the 9th sword move? Under everyone's anticipation, the lovely girl in white wore a solemn expression. She moved her wrist, allowing power to accumulate to an ultimate level. An unexpected dazzling light flashed in her beautiful eyes. Whoosh! She dealt an aggressive split, directly cutting into the air. The 9th move of the wave superposition sword art was a success. Jian Minger finally felt at ease after completing this. She sheathed her sword and stood in place. A commotion broke out on the drill ground. The 9th sword move. She actually did it? Jian Xinhong stared at Jian Minger intensely and said, in the first place, the wave superposition sword art is the highest technique among the 18 first-class sword arts of Sword Pavilion. 7 moves are enough for the profound level, what more the 9th move? This girl is still so young, but she's capable of demonstrating the sword art to this level. It's truly rare. Situ Qingyue Yishio and a few people agreed with this comment. After they learned the mystery of the wave superposition sword art, they immediately understood the difficulties of accumulating the power by 9-fold. Yet Jian Minger, a mere 16-year-old young girl, had accomplished this feat. Shui Hanxin, looks like you've taken in a talented disciple. The girl's talent for cultivation is already incredible, but it looks like her gift in sword principle isn't below any of the peerless talents in your sect, said Bai Chong, glancing at Shui Hanxin. Since she's my disciple, she'll naturally be extraordinary, Shui Hanxin replied calmly. On the grandstand, Jian Lan looked increasingly smug as he listened in on the conversations between the famous experts. Minger, you may leave, he ordered. Yes. Jian Minger bowed lightly towards the grandstand and left the arena under everyone's attention. On her way down, her glance inevitably went to Jian Wuxiang, who was standing at the edge of the drill ground. Jian Wuxiang, you demonstrated the 9th sword move when you taught me the wave superposition sword art. I can do it as well as you now. Jian Minger's glance carried a hint of pride. Unlike the other Marquis Mansion disciples, Jian Wuxiang's expression was still without any change when he saw her perform the 9th sword move. It seemed that, in his eyes, her ninth move was just SOSO. Next, Jian Ying. The battle continued, but Jian Minger's performance was simply too brilliant. She had completely overshadowed the rest. The last one, Jian Wushuang. It was finally Jian Wushuang's turn. When they heard his name, many disciples on the drill ground immediately wore odd expressions. Jian Wushuang was the infamous trash of Sword Marquee Mansion. But he had formed his spiritual power 2 months ago and gained victory against Jian Lin, giving others a new impression of him. However, when they heard that he challenged Jian Minger 2 months ago to a duel today, everyone thought he was an overreaching idiot. Now it was this idiot's turn. Ignoring the attention, Jian Wushuang slowly stepped on the arena. Jian Wushuang. The way Jian Lan glanced at him was clearly different than how he looked at other disciples. "Show us your strongest martial arts or what you're most skilled in," Jian Lan said, his voice somewhat colder. Jian Wushuang prepared his sword, but his gaze was focused on the grandstand right ahead. On the grandstand, those famous experts took little notice of him and were still chattering on about Jian Menger. Only the leisurely Bai Chong smiled at him. Jian Wushuang nodded at him and unsheathed his long sword. Whoosh! The sword light was like the tide, surging forward with great momentum. It made everyone feel as if they had been submerged in the sea, yet carried a deeper meaning at the same time. Ah! Once Jian Wushuang demonstrated his swordsmanship, everyone on the drill ground was surprised. Even the famous experts in the grandstand were amazed. Wave superposition sword art. This little boy is also performing the wave superposition sword art? Situ Qingyue laughed happily. It's the same sword art as Jian Menger. But since hers was too dazzling earlier, this boy wouldn't impress us even if he does as well as her. It doesn't matter even if he performs the 7th or 8th move, Yishio said, laughing. That may not be true, Bai Chong suddenly spoke up. What do you mean? Situ Qingyue and Yishio asked. If Jian Menger can demonstrate the 9th sword move, reaching great heights in the wave superposition sword art, do you think the genius who imparted the sword art to her will be worse off? Bai Chong replied. What? Everyone in the stands was shocked. Mr. Bai Chong, are you saying that little boy taught Jian Menger the wave superposition sword art? Can he also perform the 9th sword move? Situ Qingyue asked, having connected the dots. I don't know how good he is. Let's just watch and see, Bai Chong replied perfunctorily, not saying much. The curiosity of these famous experts in the stands had been piqued, so they immediately concentrated their attention on Jian Wushuang. Chapter 23. Chapter 23, Supreme Level? Transcendent. When everyone saw that Jian Wushuang was also performing the wave superposition sword art, an uproar was raised on the drill ground. He dared to perform the wave superposition sword art. He's digging his own grave. It was not such a big deal if 2 contestants demonstrated the same sword art here. But one of them was a dazzling and peerless genius and the other was the one who challenged that talent 2 months ago. It felt like a subtle provocation for Jian Wushuang to perform the same sword art. Jian Menger had already pushed this sword art to its greatest height. Isn't Jian Wushuang asking for trouble by performing it? That's not for sure. Don't forget it was Jian Wushuang who taught Jian Menger this sword art. So what? Jian Menger demonstrated the 9th sword move. Even if Jian Wushuang can do the same, what can he prove? What's the point to his provocation? All eyes were on Jian Wushuang, who was standing on the arena. Many were wearing sneers on their faces. A small part of the disciples in Sword Pavilion wanted to argue for him, but those arguments seemed so weak in front of the Jian Menger who had performed the 9th move of this sword art. Jian Wushuang ignored everyone else. He had long focused all his attention on performing this sword art. Wave superposition sword art was a constant accumulation of power, stacked one over the other, requiring mastery of the most basic sword techniques. The sword light emerged like a tide. There was no hesitation in Jian Wushuang's movements as he performed the first 7 sword moves under everyone's eyes. The sound of the sword slicing the air reverberated with each move. His moves were still smooth after the 7th one and much more coordinated compared to Jian Menger's. The 8th sword move followed the 7th. It's the 8th sword move. People on the drill ground looked at him with earnest attention. But Jian Wushuang did not stop after the 8th sword move and everyone realized he was attempting the 9th sword move. But the 9th move was the peak level of this sword art. Would he be able to do it? Just as the curiosity of the spectators was roused, he was already ready to make his move in the next moment. In an instant he made another sword move. The ninth sword move. He still demonstrated it naturally and smoothly. Exclamations rang all over the drill ground. Haha! As expected, Bai Chong was right on the mark. This little boy actually managed to perform the ninth sword move, and he did it even more smoothly than Jian Meng'er. His talent for sword principle is no less than hers, Sidu Qingyue said, smiling. The other famous experts in the grandstand nodded to show their agreements. Don't make your assumptions too soon. It's still too early to decide, said Bai Chong, wearing a mysterious smile. Everyone was stunned and instantly turned towards the arena. Instead of sheathing his blade, Jian Wushuang, who had completed the ninth sword move, continued to wield his sword. What? The drill ground fell into silence just then. He had already completed the ninth sword move and had theoretically reached the limit. Yet he did not sheath his blade. What did he want to do? Don't tell me he's attempting the 10th move? With someone speaking, the whole drill ground burst into exclamations in an instant. The 10th sword move. He's going to perform the 10th sword move. Is there be a 10th move in the wave superposition sword art? Everyone was stunned. That included Jian Meng'er, whose beautiful eyes were staring at Jian Wushuang in disbelief. Jian Wushuang was indeed continuing this sword art, power superposed on one another. When it finally reached a certain degree, his face turned steely and he stepped forward to make another sword move without any hesitation. The 10th move. Swish. His sword edge cut through the air, making an ear-splitting explosion. The power of the 10th sword move was evidently far stronger than the 9th sword move. A furor swept the drill ground. Bravo! Sidu Qingyue suddenly stood up, his eyes flashing with excitement. Jian Xinhong, your sword marquee mansion really has so many talents. We don't even have to talk about Jian Meng'er. She's an amazing genius. And you have this boy who has superposed the power 10 times and performed the 10th sword. His talent in sword principle is pretty terrifying. Yi Xiu looked at Jian Xinhong, his words carrying a deeper meaning. Jian Xinhong was pretty shocked himself. He did not know how he should respond. Jian Xinhong, didn't you just say the highest level of this sword art was the 9th move? What about the 10th move? Sidu Qingyue asked. Jian Xinhong took a deep breath and said solemnly, indeed, the highest level of the wave superposition sword art is the 9th move. The 10th move is at the supreme level. However, it's too hard to perform it. Since the time Sword Marquee Mansion obtained this sword art, there has only been one person who could perform the 10th move. That was Jian Nantian, the previous Sword Pavilion master. And this boy is his son. Jian Nanshan's son? Situ Qingyue was frozen in shock. Instantly, the famous experts in the grandstand began to look at Jian Wushuang differently. The 10th move. I just knew the boy wouldn't disappoint me. A smile came over Bai Chong's face but disappeared just as quickly. What? Bai Chong blurted out in surprise. Everyone in the grandstand was astonished. Jian Wushuang, whose performance of the 10th move had left everyone astounded, was not done yet. His sword light began to flutter, ready to accumulate power. He was going to attempt the 11th move. That's impossible. Even Jian Xinhong could not help standing up, eyes gleaming with horror. This boy is mad. He's mad. Under the arena, Jian Lan was shouting again and again. The 11th move? Bai Chong and the rest in grandstand stood up with surprise. Even the high and lofty Shui Hanxin was stunned and, for the first time, looking at him approvingly. The drill ground sank into a deadly silence. Everyone's eyes were concentrated on Jian Wushuang. He did not pay mind to their attention and closed his eyes, recalling everything his father told him when he taught him this sword art. Shuang, remember that there's no such thing as the supreme level to any sword art. If the 10th move is the supreme level of the wave superposition sword art, all you need to do is to transcend the supreme level. Swish. The ruthless sword light emerged with fury. This sword move seemed capable of splitting the world into two. On the arena, Jian Wushuang opened his eyes. A faint smile appeared on his face. I have transcended the supreme level. Father, I've done it. Chapter 24. Chapter 24. Spiritual power forms the foundation. What a shock. Everyone was shocked at the unprecedented movement. The 11th move? He really achieved it. How is that possible? If they had found Jian Meng'er performing the 9th move of the wave superposition sword art amazing, then they could only describe Jian Wushuang's performance of the 11th move as being unbelievable. It was incredible. He was, without any doubt, incredible. He really pulled off the 11th move. In the grandstand, the esteemed elder Shui Hanshin of Tianyuan sword sect looked stunned. After all, there was not a single person his age capable of doing that, even in her sect. That meant his talent for sword principle was unrivaled by even those in her sect. This young man, the sword marquis mansion master, Jian Xinhong, rose and stared intensely at Jian Wushuang. I'm the mansion master, but I didn't know his gift in sword principle had become this great. Situ Qingyue and the others beside him were beyond shocked. Humph. The organizer of the battle, Jian Lan, snorted and turned around to face the famous experts. Perhaps you all don't know this. Though Jian Wushuang's talent in sword principle is heaven-defying, he's trash that can't even gather spiritual power. Without a corresponding cultivation of spiritual power, what use is his excellent swordsmanship? Oh, you mean the boy can't gather spiritual power? Asked Situ Qingyue and several people, their expressions turning odd. That's right. In Sword Marquis Mansion, everyone knows Jian Wushuang is trash who has been unable to gather spiritual power since he was 12. Even though he succeeded and became a warrior at last, Jian Wushuang lost the golden 4 years for a warrior to lay a solid foundation. So, learning about this, what accomplishments do you think he can achieve in the future? Sneered Jian Lan. Is this true? He just formed his spiritual power 2 months ago? What a pity. Situ Qingyue and several excellent famous experts shook their heads and sighed. In the way of martial arts, the years from 12 to 16 were the most crucial stage, being the years of puberty. It was the best time to lay a solid foundation for cultivation. Once a person missed this golden stage, his achievements in the future would be limited. Of course, this was only applicable to ordinary practitioners, not for defiant cultivators who have cultivated a deviant cultivation like heavenly creation skill. Spiritual power is the foundation of the way of martial arts, while martial arts technique and swordsmanship are external factors. Even if he has excellent swordsmanship, he can't achieve much with weak cultivation of spiritual power. What a pity for this boy. Shui Hanxing glanced Jian Wushuang and shook her head. Even with ordinary cultivation, he has the right to be one of our disciples like Jian Menger with his gift in sword principle. Yet the fact is, he has missed the best time for his cultivation. He has basically no chance of breaking through the spiritual sea realm. He doesn't have the qualification to be an expert. Several famous experts beside her nodded. Though Shui Hanxing's explanation was half-hearted and sloppy, she was right. They could only shake their heads and sigh, feeling sorry for a wasted talent in sword principle. On the drill ground, many disciples of Sword Marquis Mansion had also recovered from the shock and were sighing before long. Jian Wushuang's unparalleled gift in sword principle had given everyone present a shock. But what could it prove? In the world where everyone bowed down to warriors, cultivation of spiritual power was the foundation. The 11th move. Jian Menger fixed a cold glare at the lonely figure descending down the arena. She had long known about Jian Wushuang's gift in sword principle. After her use of the 9th move of the wave superposition sword art, she thought she had finally surpassed him, even if it was just by a hair, but the gap between them was still huge. Either way, the cultivation of spiritual power formed the foundation of the way of martial arts. She vowed to crush his confidence in the second round of the battle. On the grandstand, Jian Lan commented, "Cultivation of spiritual power is the foundation to cultivating martial arts. Our disciples shouldn't neglect the cultivation of spiritual power for martial arts technique. That's simply a fool's way." Jian Lan's words resounded throughout the drill ground. It was obviously meant for Jian Wushuang. We'll start the second round of the battle next. This round tests your cultivation of spiritual power. Please place the spiritual power gem here. Someone lifted a huge transparent gem, placing it on the arena. The middle of the gem was divided into 10 layers of microgrooves. The spiritual power gem was used to test cultivation of spiritual power, with 10 layers representing the 10 levels from the first step of the spirit path, up to the exceptional spiritual sea realm. First, Jian Lin. Jian Lin remained the first participant. Do your best to instill your spiritual power in the spiritual power gem. Jian Lan said. Yes. Jian Lin nodded, took a deep breath and put out his palms, displaying his ability. Soon, a cluster of spiritual power flowed into the spiritual power gem. With the infusion of spiritual power, a bright light surged from the spiritual power gem. A dazzling violet light surged from the bottom to the top of the 10 layers of the gem, putting his cultivation of spiritual power at the peak of the sixth step of the spirit path. It did not end there. A fleck of violet light lit the seventh layer. The light was still dim, but the layer was still lit. The seventh layer was lit up. The seventh step of the spirit path. Jian Lin finally broke through the sixth step of the spirit path after so long. People on the drill ground praised him, and many of them looked at Jian Lin with envy. When he withdrew his palms, Jian Lin noticed the attention on him. His mood turned better. He had been mortified ever since he was defeated by Jian Wushuang a month ago, but he had now finally recovered some of his dignity. So what if Jian Wushuang has an excellent gift in sword principle? He's probably still in the sixth step now. Jian Lin sneered at Jian Wushuang and stared at him provocatively. But when he saw Jian Wushuang, his anger flared up. This bastard dares ignore me. Jian Lin raged. He saw how Jian Wushuang had his eyes closed as he leaned against the wall the whole time. His attitude naturally irritated Jian Lin. What he did not know was that Jian Wushuang had never concerned himself with him since the very beginning. Jian Wushuang had never cared about him, not back then and certainly not now. Chapter 25. Chapter 25, Detection of Spiritual Power. Next, Jian Meng'er. When the lovely girl in a snow-white dress went up the platform once again, the entire drill ground was awed into silence by her beauty. She was still so cold and arrogant. Though Jian Wushuang's performance had suppressed hers, it was not enough to overshadow her brilliance. What truly impressed everyone was her heaven-defying talent for cultivation. She was a mere 16-year-old girl who had achieved the profound spiritual sea realm. This was something unprecedented in the history of Sword Marquee Mansion. Next, the detection of spiritual power would be the perfect opportunity for her to showcase her peerless talent. On the arena, Jian Meng'er inched her palms closer to the spiritual power gem, gently touching it. Everyone held their breath. Has she really achieved the profound spiritual sea realm? Those famous experts from various spheres of influence were watching with earnest attention. Though they had heard that Jian Meng'er had such an achievement, this time they would be able to witness it themselves. They would only dare to believe it if they saw it with their own eyes. A harsh violent light lit within the 10-layered spiritual power gem. The light filled the 7th layer without any suspense, then the 8th layer lit up as well. The 8th layer represented the initial spiritual sea realm. It still lit up with that dazzling violet light like the rest of the layers. Then came the 9th layer. It lit up as expected, the light just as brilliant. There were distinctions within the different layers of the spiritual power gem, and they were determined by the brightness of the violet light. Take the previous contestant, Jian Lin, as an example. When he reached the 7th step of Spirit Path, he managed to light up the 7th layer of the spiritual power gem. However, it was very dim as he was still new to the realm. But now, through the infusion of Jian Meng'er's spiritual power, the 9th layer had lit up with the most brilliant of lights. What did this mean? The peak. The peak of the profound spiritual sea realm. She has already achieved the profound spiritual sea realm, and she is not just a newcomer to it. All of a sudden, the drill ground was in an uproar. Good. Very good. On the grandstand, Jian Xinhong rose to his feet and applauded, excitement evident in his eyes. Jian Lan laughed heartily, unable to conceal his joy. She not only achieved the profound spiritual sea realm, but even its peak? Everyone else on the grandstand also looked exceptionally amazed. Their amazement was because, even within the same level, there was a tremendous difference between the early stages and the peak of it. It would take an ordinary warrior at least several years to accumulate enough spiritual power to achieve the profound spiritual sea realm. For some, it may take even longer. Yet Jian Meng'er was only 16 years old. It was already unbelievable enough that she had achieved the profound spiritual sea realm at that age, never mind reaching the peak. Everyone felt like they were in a daze. Jian Meng'er. On the drill ground, numerous disciples of Sword Marquee Mansion were staring at the peerless and beautiful person on the platform. Besides Jian Wushuang, none of them had any desire to compete against her. The chosen one. The most beautiful one. It was none other than Jian Meng'er. Bai Chong squinted and said, Shui Hanxin, you've really accepted a great disciple. For her to achieve the peak at 16 years old, she really has an extraordinary talent for cultivation. She's not bad. Shui Hanxin nodded, smiling. This girl does have an extraordinary talent for cultivation. Even among the many talented disciples in my Tianyuan sword sect, she's among the best. With my guidance, it won't be a problem for her to achieve gold core before turning 20. If she's willing to work hard and has good luck, perhaps another peak existence will come out of my sect. A peak existence? Everyone was stunned. Elder Shui, are you saying that Jian Ming'er will be able to achieve the Yin-Yang Void Realm in the future? Jian Xinhong seemed somewhat excited. No one doubted that Jian Ming'er was capable of forming a gold core before turning 20. However, the Yin-Yang Void Realm was truly the peak of cultivation. Even among the powerful Tianyuan sword sect, there was only a handful who had achieved it. Within Bahui Commandery there was not even one. Was there any hope for Jian Ming'er to achieve it in the future? With her talent, nothing is impossible as long as she's willing to work hard, Shui Hanxin replied placidly. Though she sounded indifferent, it was difficult for the audience to calm themselves down. On the arena, Jian Ming'er was being watched by everyone, but her eyes were directed at Jian Wushuang. Her gaze turned chilly and she said to him, Jian Wushuang, I've warned you. I'll let you feel complete devastation in this battle today. You're not qualified to surpass me in your entire life. Can you see it now? Leaning on the corner, Jian Wushuang raised his head with his hands folded. His eyes turned as acute as electricity when they met Jian Ming'er's. Though no actual conversation took place, he could understand what she wanted to say through her eyes. The peak of the profound spiritual sea realm? Very good. Things will be more interesting this way. He touched his parched lips, his eyes darkening as a fire raged within him. The battle continued, yet compared to Jian Ming'er's results, the cultivation of spiritual power of the other disciples seemed even dimmer than a firefly's light. The last one, Jian Wushuang. It's your turn. Jian Lan called, voice cold. Leaning on the corner, Jian Wushuang rolled his eyes and slowly made his ways towards the arena. His steps were slow as he put his foot one after another, attracting everyone's attention. All eyes were on him, including the famous experts. The most eye-grabbing people in this battle were doubtlessly Jian Ming'er and him. In the first round of the battle earlier, Jian Wushuang shocked everyone with the 11th move of the wave superposition sword art. Though no one had any expectations for him in this second round, no one dared to belittle him anymore at the very least. He's up on the arena? Watching Jian Wushuang walk towards the platform, a smile appeared on Jian Ming'er's face. You achieved the peak of the 6th step of the spirit path a month ago. Now let's see how much progress you've made. Show me what you've achieved during these so-called 2 months. Chapter 26. Chapter 26, A Frightening Battle. Jian Wushuang became the focus on the drill ground. I heard this boy achieved the peak of the 6th step as early as a month ago. I wonder if he has reached the 7th step yet. Achieving the 7th step in a month? Ridiculous. The way I see it, he's probably still at the peak of the 6th step. Though his cultivation is considered decent even among us disciples here, he's still far beneath Jian Ming'er. If he challenges her without achieving the 7th step, then he's a fool. Even if he's somehow lucky enough to achieve it, challenging her who has achieved the profound spiritual sea realm is just bringing disgrace on his own head. The other disciples started discussing among themselves in whispers. Jian Wushuang eventually stopped in front of the spiritual power gem in the arena. Looking at it, he took a deep breath. 2 months' worth of earnest cultivation. He recalled the past 2 months where he dared not even spend a minute relaxing. He stayed in the cultivating room and endured the massive pressure, continuously turning the torment into something he could be proud of. In the gladiator arena, he risked his life to join the challenge so he could get his hands on all the first-class spirit-cultivating pills he needed. In Nine Wolves Mountain, he fought against the bloody lion and absorbed a whole pool of primordial spiritual liquid. He had spent 2 months frantically cultivating, and now it was time to show them all his hard work. Everyone looks down on me. They all think I'm overreaching to challenge Jian Ming'er. In that case, you all better open your eyes wide and watch carefully. With a heat gleamed in his eyes, he touched the spiritual power gem with his hands. Using heavenly creation skill, the spiritual power began to pour out from within. A dazzling violet light emerged from the spiritual power gem almost instantaneously. The 6th level of the 10-layered spiritual power gem lit up after Jian Wushuang's spiritual power flowed into it. The same brilliant light marked the 7th step of the spirit path. The 7th layer lit up. The 7th step of the spirit path. He actually achieved it. Cries of surprises resounded throughout the drill ground. Amidst the crowd was Jian Lin, who had gone pale. This time he had reached the seventh step of the spirit path as well and thought he had finally caught up to Jian Wushuang. The constant flow of Jian Wushuang's spiritual power sparked the violet light that filled the seventh layer of the spiritual power gem, which was truly glaring. And it was still going. After the seventh layer, the violet light instantly lit up the eighth. The eighth level? Jian Lin's eyes widened in shock. The eighth layer represented the initial spiritual sea realm. The bright violet light was still going, inching towards the ninth layer. It's just as I thought. The spiritual power gem tests the cultivation of spiritual power based on its force. Though I haven't achieved the spiritual sea realm yet, I've reached the peak eighth heaven of the divine path in the heavenly creation skill. That's equivalent to the peak of the initial spiritual sea realm. The strength of the heavenly creation skill is far stronger than the similar ones. And the ninth level, Jian Wushuang's gaze turned sharp and he shouted, "Light it up." Light abruptly filled the ninth layer of the spiritual power gem. That meant the layer that represented the profound spiritual sea realm was lit. Impossible. On the arena, Jian Lan was the first to make noise. There was no trace of any smugness on his face, only a distorted expression that looked almost mad. "Jian Lan, earlier you said this boy hadn't even gathered his spiritual power 2 months ago?" said Sidu Qingyue, looking directly at him. Aye. Jian Lan could not find any words to retort. The ninth layer? How's that possible? Jian Xinhong's eyes were round. The profound spiritual sea realm. He actually achieved the profound spiritual sea realm? How's that possible? It must be a lie. A lie. It's completely impossible. 2 months ago he couldn't even gather spiritual power. Everyone had gone mad. The whole drill ground had completely gone mad. The ninth level? There was finally a change in Jian Minger's arrogant expression that she had maintained on her beautiful face since the beginning of the competition. An unprecedented fearful expression crept onto her face. Fright. Yes, even Jian Minger was shocked. She was a peerless genius who had started her cultivation at the age of 12. 4 years since then, she had achieved the peak of the profound spiritual sea realm. Her achievement was remarkable. How could Jian Wushuang compare? Everyone knew Jian Wushuang was once trash who could not even gather spiritual power. Everyone knew he was just an ordinary man without a trace of spiritual power 2 months ago. Everyone thought him wanting to challenge her today was the world's biggest joke. But now, who dared to laugh at him whose spiritual power gem had lit up the ninth layer, representing the profound spiritual sea realm? Who dared to say Jian Wushuang did not qualify to challenge her? If people had found Jian Wushuang lamentable after he had surprisingly pulled off the 11th move of the wave superposition sword art in the first round, then the cultivation of spiritual power he had just presented was truly shocking. Genius. Monster. These two words inevitably appeared in everyone's minds. Jian Minger started cultivating at 12 and achieved the peak of the profound spiritual sea realm at merely 16. She could already be considered a peerless talent. Yet Jian Wushuang had only spent 2 months to go from an ordinary person to someone in the profound spiritual sea realm. What was he if not a monster? And just then, the person who everyone regarded as a monster had slowly withdrawn his palm. With his dark pupils, he swept everyone with his gaze, carrying a hint of disdain. Standing high up on the arena, Jian Wushuang looked down upon the disciples of Sword Marquee Mansion. Each of them who met his eyes could not help bowing their heads. On the entire drill ground, there was only one person who dared to meet his gaze, all while carrying a trace of stubbornness. It was Jian Minger. Jian Wushuang's gaze finally landed on her. There was no need for any words. In that moment, their burning battle intent to fight had risen to the surface. Jian Minger, get the fuck up here. His cold growl was akin to a thunderbolt, resonating through heaven and earth. The entire drill ground instantly became ablaze with excitement. Chapter 27. Chapter 27, Summit Battle. Jian Minger, get the fuck up here. A chilly shrill cry echoed, resounding through the drill ground for a long time. A beautiful girl in a long snow-white robe raised her head, promptly leaping onto the stage with one step. Standing on the stage less than 10 meters away from each other, two figures were on a warpath. There was an intense feeling of confrontation that you do not sense any other time. The long sword on Jian Wushuang's back was removed from the sheath and a vibration of sword essence like the rolling tide radiated from it. As the cold sword edge directly pointed at Jian Meng'er, without the slightest trace of emotion, Jian Wushuang coldly said, "As I said 2 months ago, I have come to find you today. The fight between us is inevitable. It had to come to an end." Jian Meng'er's face was stone cold as she stood there with her snow-white robe blowing. The power of her peak of the profound spiritual sea realm was completely released. "Jian Wushuang, I don't know how you increased your strength in just 2 months. Anyway, I still believe that the winner takes all. Since you are so desperate to fight with me, then bring it on." The brief talk led the atmosphere to an elevated level immediately. "Oh, I see." There was an uproar of excitement and expectation rising in the area around the drill ground. It seemed that the disciples of Sword Marquis Mansion were on the brink of madness, waiting to witness how things would unfold. This would be an eye-catching duel. What an exciting turn of events. It was universally acknowledged that a 16-year-old teenager, considered to be a super genius top of the list, had reached the peak of the profound spiritual sea realm. The other one who was buried in oblivion, amazed people with their spiritual power, on par with the profound spiritual sea realm, which was acquired within 2 months. The battle between them. Even those famous experts among the audience were looking forward to watching the fight between them. It was the summit battle between two talents. In fact, the people who lived in Sword Marquis Mansion thought Jian Wushuang's challenge to Jian Meng'er was a joke and brought disgrace on his own head. Now, after 2 rounds of battle, no one dared to say it was wishful thinking. According to the sword principle, someone who cultivated the wave superposition sword art to the 11th move was definitely a genius. According to the cultivation of spiritual power, he lit up the 9th level of the spiritual power gem, also equivalent to the profound spiritual sea realm. So they were neck and neck in this battle. He had the qualification to challenge Jian Meng'er. In addition, it was hard to say who would be the victor. "Ladies and gentlemen, you see these two. Who's better than the other?" Bai Chong asked with a smile. "It is hard to say." Sidu Qingyue spoke first. In cultivation of spiritual power, Jian Meng'er had reached the peak of the profound spiritual sea realm, which was slightly better than Jian Wushuang. In regards to swordsmanship, Jian Wushuang gained the upper hand. They were well matched, making it hard to judge their true strength. "I agree." Yi Xiu nodded his head. Although cultivation of spiritual power is a fundamental step in the process of practicing martial arts, the strength of martial arts technique is an important factor that could also determine the outcome, considering the small disparity in their cultivation. By virtue of their swordsmanship, Jian Wushuang and Jian Meng'er could totally brawl with each other, and the outcome will be unpredictable. "Shui Hanxin, what do you think?" Bai Chong suddenly looked at her beside him. "I bet Meng'er will win," Shui Hanxin said following. "Oh, you are confident you are in your disciple?" Bai Chong said with the corner of his lip raised. "Bai Chong, did you just notice?" Shui Hanxin glanced at Bai Chong, laughing as she said, "That little guy called Jian Wushuang, although he lit up the spiritual power gem during the detection of spiritual power, I could see that he barely reached it. So I am sure that he hasn't reached the profound spiritual sea realm. I think his cultivation is between the peak of the initial spiritual sea realm and the profound spiritual sea realm." "Indeed." Bai Chong just noticed this, nodding. Moreover, we all know that this little guy had not gathered spiritual power 2 months ago. Now, 2 months have passed, his spiritual cultivation has unexpectedly increased so much, so I think there are bound to be many external factors. Shui Hanxin said plainly. For example, regardless of the consequences, he swallowed pills or treasures to enhance his cultivation by force. But the enhancement would lead him to collapse radically. Not only is his chance of becoming an expert in the future very slim, he also won't be able to utilize 100% of his strength. His performance will be at a mere 20% or 30% at best. People in the spectators' stand frowned upon hearing these words. Indeed, they also thought of this possibility. After all, it was inconceivable that his cultivation of spiritual power increased so quickly. It made no sense to say that he did not use some pills or natural treasures. However, they did not know that Jian Wushuang was a deviant cultivator. Therefore, his training could not be judged by common sense. Of course, apart from these two things, the most important part is that I have absolute confidence in my disciple. I know my disciple better than anyone else. It is impossible to find a talent of the same age who can beat my disciple in Sword Marquis Mansion, Shui Hanxin said nonchalantly with a look of absolute confidence. It is really subjective, but I rather think the little guy called Jian Wushuang could win. Bai Chong said and laughed. Since Mr. Bai Chong thinks so, let's wait and see. Shui Xinhan said with an indifferent smile. Look, these two little guys are fighting with each other. Yi Xiu said abruptly from the spectators' stand. Everyone instantaneously turned their eyes to the stage. Jian Ming'er was the first to attack. As a trace of killing intent burst out from triple kill sword as Jian Ming'er took a huge step and swung the long sword with an irresistible force. Sword tide. When the long sword suddenly slashed out, it was like the rolling tide sweeping over the area. Sword tide was the most terrifying move of the ceaseless waterflow sword art, and its sweeping wave was the essence of this trick. Under normal circumstances, this move, if mastered to the profound level, could produce 6 layers. But at this moment, Jian Ming'er's wave swept out with 8 layers. It's ridiculous. Jian Wushuang chuckled and caught the waves with his sword, a very common sword, dissolving the 8 layers of sword essence without any effort when he touched them by taking advantage of their force. Then he made a huge stride toward his opponent. Whoosh! A tide like sword light was released, creating waves in the area. Jian Wushuang also performed the move sword tide. But when the sword art was performed, the rolling waves of sword essence burst out with 12 layers in an instant. Chapter 28. Chapter 28, Superior Swordsmanship. Amazing. One stroke was enough to dispel her sword art? How did he do that? His sword arts are so strong. The first fight between the two brought about bursts of exclamations throughout the drill ground. Jian Wushuang's understanding of swordsmanship is much better than we ever imagined. The famous experts on the stands also felt amazed. They all had broader horizons. Naturally, they could see that Jian Wushuang's swordsmanship was extraordinary. The sword stroke he displayed before seemed simple, but in fact, it required perfect use of the sword art's power as well as a high comprehension of basic swordsmanship. Next, Jian Wushuang used the same sword tide and released 12 layers of sword essence, which astonished everyone. After all, Jian Ming'er tried her best but only brought about 8 layers of sword essence. This tremendous difference immediately demonstrated the big gap between their skills. Fuck off. After an effeminate shout, Jian Ming'er attacked straight ahead indignantly, with her towering long sword. This simple action, carrying an incomparably strong power, was filled with an awe-inspiring righteousness. A magnificent spiritual power gathered together and then rushed out all at once, colliding with the onrushing sword essence wave released by Jian Wushuang. Tianyuan sword skill. While watching from the stands, Bai Chong's pupils immediately shrank and he cast a glance at Shui Hanxin, then whispered, "No wonder you're so confident. Your baby disciple has already practiced Tianyuan sword skills." Shui Hanxin smiled faintly but stayed silent. Tianyuan sword skill, the supreme sword art that was practiced in Tianyuan sword sect, was far stronger than various sword arts in Sword Marquis Mansion. The degree of strength of cultivation level represented the degree of pureness, precision and momentum of its spiritual power. The overall strength of Jian Ming'er, who practiced the Tianyuan sword skill, was definitely far stronger than ordinary people at the peak of the profound spiritual sea realm. That's why Jian Ming'er could overcome 20 movements when she competed with the 4 great elders of Sword Pavilion by virtue of the profound spiritual sea realm. The 12 waves of sword essence were scattered Jian Ming'er's sword strike, then streaks of sword shadow burst out from one of Jian Ming'er's hands. Each sword was startlingly fast. Aurora sword art? Jian Wushuang slightly raised the corners of his mouth, followed by a sudden cold voice. I told you before, even though the Aurora sword art pursues extreme speed, blindly increasing your speed will affect the coordination and coherence between the sword arts. But obviously you didn't take my advice. Not to mention that your sword art is too slow. Too slow. These words resounded on the drill ground and immediately made all of the disciples of Marquis Mansion stunned. After all, in their view, Jian Ming'er's sword art was fast enough. They were too fast to be seen with the naked eye. In only an instant, a series of sword shadows rushed out. Dozens of sword shadows were displayed by her, but Jian Wushuang withstood them all. Too slow. Too slow. Jian Wushuang resisted the swords while shaking his head at the same time. It was clear that he could easily withstand these swords. Jian Ming'er bit the bullet and tried her best to increase the speed. However, even though she displayed the Aurora sword art with her full power, she couldn't even touch Jian Wushuang's clothes. I'll show you the real Aurora sword art now, Jian Wushuang said coldly. After saying that, Shua, an awesome sword shadow much faster than that of Jian Meng'er, rushed out at once. They were quick like lightning, and the consecutive sword strikes were coordinated and coherent. Too fast. Oh my God. Lots of cheering erupted on the drill ground. They felt amazed by the speedy swordsmanship of Jian Meng'er. As for Jian Wushuang's speed with the Aurora sword art, they truly felt it was unbelievable. It was so fast that people couldn't see it clearly. How can it be so fast? Jian Meng'er was greatly frightened. Seeing the overlapping sword shadows sweeping towards her like lightning, she immediately used the Boulder sword art, which was a special defensive sword art among the 18 first-class sword arts of Sword Pavilion, to resist with her all strength. Clang, 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 clang. After many successive clashes, Jian Meng'er was obviously flustered. Jian Wushuang's sword art was so fast that she couldn't withstand them, and now she was forced into an embarrassing situation. After the sword light radiated for only a few moments, the sword art that was falling like torrential rain suddenly stopped. 18 breaths. Forced to the edge of the tower, Jian Meng'er stared in front of her. At Jian Wushuang. She calculated the breaths while she tried to resist Jian Wushuang's sword art. After Jian Wushuang finished the entire Aurora sword art, it was only 18 breaths. While she needed at least 37 breaths to display the whole sword art. This meant that Jian Wushuang's speed with this sword art was more than twice as fast as her, and it was obvious that Jian Wushuang displayed it more coherently and with more coordination. It was too fast for her to resist. Jian Meng'er took a glance at the sleeve of her robe. 2 holes from a sword edge could be seen clearly, exposing her white skin, which made her feel shameful. Bastard! With an angry shout, Jian Meng'er attacked him directly with triple kill sword fiercely. Drifting snow sword art. One of the 18 first-class sword arts Sword Pavilion. It's ridiculous. Jian Wushuang sneered, easily facing this sword art. Then he used the drifting snow sword art in a more overbearing and aggressive manner. Just as the old saying goes, serve them with the same sauce. No matter what sword art Jian Meng'er displayed, Jian Wushuang resisted it easily at first and then returned it in a tougher, more mature and perfect manner. Superior swordsmanship. He completely surpassed her in sword arts. Jian Meng'er's swordsmanship was already good enough for her to reach the profound level in all 18 first-class sword arts of Sword Pavilion. But now, in front of Jian Wushuang, her sword arts were just like tricks played by little children. The gap was so big. The gap of swordsmanship between the two was even bigger than we expected. Looking down, Sidu Qingyue solemnly said, Jian Meng'er has good swordsmanship, but Jian Wushuang's swordsmanship is much better. It's hard to imagine that a 16-year-old boy could have such impressive swordsmanship. Jian Xinhong, in Sword Marquee Mansion, are you the only person who has better swordsmanship than this little guy? Yishio looked toward Jian Xinhong. As the Sword Marquee Mansion master, Jian Xinhong had a full understanding of the situation regarding Sword Marquee Mansion. Hearing Yishio's words at this moment, he couldn't help nodding in agreement. As for swordsmanship, merely in Sword Marquee Mansion he was the only one that was better than Jian Wushuang. Chapter 29. Chapter 29, Unworthy. Shui Hanshin, if it continues on like this, your dear disciple will be defeated, said Bai Chong with a smile. They are still fighting and the little guy called Jian Wushuang only has a small advantage. It is too early to say that my disciple will lose, right? Shui Hanshin said with a complacent expression as if everything was already in the bag. Then continue to watch. Bai Chong frowned and said nothing more. In the arena, eye-catching sword light flashed. Jian Meng'er had successively performed many strikes using first-class sword arts of the Sword Pavilion, which were incredibly formidable. However, Jian Wushuang not only countered her attacks, he also countered them with superior sword moves in response. The gap in swordsmanship was too large. Although Jian Meng'er had an absolute advantage when using her spiritual power, it was difficult to utilize this at the moment, as her strength could not be channeled through her attacks. Her arrogance and confidence were completely suppressed by Jian Wushuang. 2 months ago, you said that you and I were from 2 different worlds and that there was an insurmountable gap between us. You looked down on me. In your eyes I was trash, a wretch that could not even gather spiritual power. Just before the start of this duel, you said again that in this fight, you would let me face complete despair due to your absolutely dominant strength. You have said so much and been so arrogant. But now, Jian Ming'er, is your strength only to this extent? Come at me with your strongest attack, or could it be that with your current strength, you do not have the qualifications to deserve my attention? With eyes gleaming like lightning, Jian Wushuang stared at Jian Ming'er, who was embarrassed by the pressure from his swordsmanship. These harsh words which were spoken echoed throughout the whole drill ground, causing an uproar in the entire ground. Jian Ming'er clenched her white teeth tightly, and she involuntarily looked at Shui Hanxin, who was in the stand. She sensed her gaze on her and nodded toward her slightly. Jian Ming'er immediately understood Shui Hanxin's plan through this signal. Jian Wushuang, I know that your gift in sword principles is unique, and I never thought of fighting with you based on swordsmanship. But today I will let you know how big the world is. You, observe closely. With a groan, an awe-inspiring righteous aura burst out of her body, while holding her sword in one hand with the sword tip pointed at Jian Wushuang. Strong and formidable sword essence spread out slowly. The sword essence was extremely vigorous, grand and magnificent. This is, Bai Chong, who had been smiling in the stand, was surprised, and a hint of fright flashed in his eyes. Boundless Universe Sword Art, one of the 4 ultimate swords arts of the Tianyuan sword sect. Bai Chong looked at Shui Hanxin with gloomy countenance and coldly said, Shui Hanxin, did you teach her the Boundless Universe Sword Art? Ming'er is my disciple. Is there anything wrong with teaching her this? Shui Hanxin sneered. The Boundless Universe Sword Art, as one of the 4 ultimate sword arts of the Tianyuan sword sect, was an absolute peak-tier first-class sword art. Compared to the 18 first-class sword arts of Sword Pavilion, it was quite a bit stronger. It was because Jian Ming'er had cultivated this Boundless Heaven Sword Art, combined with her higher spiritual power cultivation compared to Jian Wushuang's, that Shui Hanxin had absolute confidence in Jian Ming'er from beginning to end. This is Boundless Heaven Sword Art? There is no longer any suspense in this duel. Situ Qingyue sighed at the side. Winner, Jian Ming'er must be the winner. Her cultivation of spiritual power is much higher than that of Jian Wushuang. Together with this top-tier first-class sword art, it is impossible for Jian Wushuang to defeat her, definitely impossible. Yi Xiu said as well. Victory. That little guy called Jian Wushuang will lose. There was a collective groan from the stands. Well done, Ming'er, excellent. At this moment, Jian Lan was clasping his hands full of excitement. Hearing the comments that Jian Ming'er would win the duel coming from the famous experts next to him, he looked ecstatic. Only Bai Chong, who stared at Shui Hanxin with a frosty gaze, coldly said, Although Jian Ming'er is your disciple, after all, she has neither really entered into Tianyuan sword sect, nor had an entry ceremony, while you have already taught her the Boundless Heaven sword art without authorization. Although you are an elder of Tianyuan sword sect, and it is normal for you to have some privileges. But, to want to win only by virtue of the Boundless Heaven sword art? I don't think so. Oh. Shui Hanxin was surprised as she looked at Bai Chong, with a condescending expression. Jian Ming'er is using the Boundless Heaven sword art. Could there be any suspense in this duel? On the battlefield, the condition of Jian Ming'er had reached the peak at this moment. That vast sword essence was at an awe-inspiring stage. Such frightful sword essence indicated that the sword strike that was about to be displayed by Jian Ming'er would be world-shaking in power. Such strong sword essence, I didn't think that Jian Ming'er would have this much power. The expression of Jian Wushuang was gloomy. This sword essence is amazing. It is not from my sword marquee mansion, so it seems that her great master taught her that. Good, I guess that makes sense. Jian Wushuang's eyes were hot. Jian Wushuang, take my strike. Remember, it is called Sword River. Jian Ming'er said coldly. Sword River? Jian Wushuang's eyes were fiery, and strong battle intent rose up from his heart immediately. Come on, let this attack determine the outcome. It won't let you down. The awe-inspiring aura from the body of Jian Ming'er had reached the ultimate limit. At this moment, she held the triple-kill sword with both hands together and raised the sword into the air. Heaven and earth seemed to pause for a moment, while the surroundings fell silent instantly. Go to hell. Finally, Jian Ming'er powerfully hacked down with her long sword. Swoosh. A bright and dazzling sword light burst forth, cutting through the air and leaving an eye-catching sword river flowing through the void. Gorgeous and beautiful. Anyone who saw this sword river would be completely immersed and awestruck. However, when the sword river flowed towards Jian Wushuang, he suddenly closed his eyes and thought of many unexpected scenes. All these scenes were about the time he and Jian Ming'er spent over the last 4 years from day to night. Once I dreamed that I could be with you forever. We would get married and even have children. You were my closest partner, someone I truly loved. I was willing to give you everything, even my life. But now, this illusion has been broken. The next sword will determine victory or defeat, as well as completely end the relationship between you and me. With this sword, I will tell you that. Jian Wushuang opened his eyes, with a flat and cold voice resounding through the sky. There are many people who are qualified to look down on me in this world, but you are unworthy. Zip. Ice-cold sword light flashed at once. Blood Shadow, the first move of the anonymous sword arts. Chapter 30. Chapter 30, Best in the World, the Formless Sword Arts. The two streams of sword light formed a stunningly beautiful sword river. One of the lights was majestic. The other was cold and dazzling as well as fleeting. Both sword lights were frighteningly powerful but very different. If one would describe Jian Ming'er's sword river as a colossal giant, capable of overpowering anything in the world, then Jian Wushuang's sword light was akin to an omnipresent assassin, lurking in the void like a king of assassination. A colossal giant had the ability to overpower the world. As an assassin and the king of assassination, was there any need for him to compete with her? It was naturally hopeless. Swish. The fleeting sword light resurfaced once again, bypassing the long and splendid stream of Jian Ming'er's sword river and appearing in front of her. Before she could even react, the sword light swept over her wrist. Blood splattered and the triple kill sword fell on the ground. Jian Wushuang was already in front of Jian Ming'er, the long sword in his hand pointing at her throat, stopping less than half a centimeter away from her skin. It was so close that she shivered from the coldness of the steel, her beautiful face finally turning pale for the first time. Time seemed to have come to a standstill. Everyone stared at the scene unfolding on the arena in disbelief. Has he really defeated her? Jian Ming'er lost. Oh my God. A thundering uproar swept the drill ground as everyone exclaimed loudly. Over on the grandstand. Impossible. Shui Hanxin was the first on her feet. She had been so confident in her disciple's victory. Changing expressions fleeted across her face. How could it be? Jian Lan was completely stunned. He could not believe what had just happened. Jian Ming'er, who uses the Boundless Heaven Sword art, was defeated. The famous experts in the grandstand exchanged looks. They could see their shock reflected in each other's eyes. Earlier they had all thought Jian Ming'er would win. There was no suspense in the confrontation, but the result was a slap in their faces. Anonymous sword art. Jian Wushuang used anonymous sword art. Jian Xinhong's eyes brightened. Anonymous sword art? Everyone turned to him. That's the supreme sword art of our sword marquee mansion. Only the masters are qualified to understand it, and only 3 sword pavilion masters have truly comprehended it. I didn't think this boy would be able to comprehend it. His father must have taught him, Jian Xinhong said excitedly. It must be his father that taught him, Jian Xinhong said excitedly. It was no wonder he was so excited. After all, anonymous sword art was so advanced that it was incredible for anyone to be able to comprehend it. What anonymous sword art? Is it even comparable to our Tianyuan sword sect's Boundless Heaven sword art? Asked Shui Hanxin, her expression turning cold. Shui Hanxin, you're being ignorant about this. Even if your Tianyuan sword sect's Boundless Heaven sword art is great, it doesn't mean there are only a few sword arts that can rival it. Take the anonymous sword art as an example. It's more powerful than the Boundless Heaven sword art. Bai Chong sneered, staring at Shui Hanxin. If you haven't heard of the anonymous sword art, I'm sure you know it as the formless sword art. Formless sword art? The best sword art in the world, formless sword art? Shui Hanxin was startled. You're saying what Jian Wushuang demonstrated was the formless sword art? That's right. The corners of Bai Chong's mouth lifted and he nodded. The famous formless sword art contains 9 different movements. The terrifying ones being the last 3, but they have been long lost. The middle 3 are rare and valuable. They're hard to get even if your sect is willing to pay a hefty price. The first 3 movements of the formless sword art are more common. Even a second-rate power, much weaker than your sect, could get their hands on them as long as they're willing to pay. As far as I know, The first sword marquis mansion master, 200 years ago, paid a heavy price for the first 3 movements, which make up the anonymous sword art. The one Jian Wushuang used was the first move of the formless sword art, Blood Shadow. Blood Shadow? Everyone could not help recalling the move Jian Wushuang had demonstrated on the arena. The sword moved like a ghost, and when the sword edge fell there was a flicker of red. It was like a red shadow, thus the technique was named Blood Shadow. It's a terrifying technique. The famous experts in the grandstand were all amazed. Shui Hanxin, your disciple lost this battle. Bai Chong said. Shui Hanxin's expression turned steely. Lost? She really lost the battle. On the arena, Jian Wushuang's long sword remained near Jian Menger's neck. If he moved his palm even just slightly closer, he could kill her at once. Jian Wushuang, are you happy now? If you're still not satisfied, just kill me directly. She was smiling, but it was an incredibly tragic smile. He looked at her momentarily without speaking before putting down his long sword. He bent over to pick up the discarded sword on the ground and stroked the metal slowly. Triple kill sword. There was a hint of surprise in her eyes when she saw him pick up the triple kill sword. When she raised her head to look at him, cold words resounded by her ears. 2 months ago, I told you the Sword Pavilion will always belong to Sword Pavilion. It'll always belong to my father and I. Don't even dream about getting a piece of it. I'll kill anyone who tries to steal it. You only have yourself to blame for what happened today. Myself to blame? A stunned Jian Menger had become a little whiter when she heard this. Her smile was self-deprecating and her eyes were wet. Just then. You only have yourself to blame? That's a fine phrase. A majestic, booming voice reverberated throughout the drill ground unexpectedly. Everyone turned and finally noticed the cold-faced young man by Shui Hanxin's side. The young man carried a long sword and had always stood quietly beside Shui Hanxin. He had not spoken since the beginning, but his brows were now uplifted. In 2 quick steps he came up to the arena and his voice echoed in the air. I'm Yi Mo of the Tianyuan Sword Sect. Do you dare to fight me? Chapter 31. Chapter 31. Seize the Spirit of the World. Pum. The indifferent young man's heavy landing shook the arena and made the floor crack. Senior brother Yi Mo. Jian Menger looked at him. What are you doing? Junior sister. Yi Mo shot a glance at Jian Menger. Great Master and I are here today to see your excellent presentation for the campaign of Sword Pavilion Master. Instead, you're being humiliated on stage. As a great master, she cannot help you in respect of her status. However, as your senior brother, I cannot just stand by and watch. Yi Mo looked at Jian Wushuang again after that and said in a deep voice, Jian Wushuang, as a man, does it give you a sense of achievement to bully a woman? A woman? Jian Wushuang could not help laughing. I couldn't tell she was a woman when she taught me an unforgettable lesson 2 months ago, that strength mattered the most in the world. Well, you're right. Yi Mo nodded, hummed in a cold voice. As you said, only strength matters in this world. But I will tell you with confidence that my junior sister, as well as the disciples of the great master, are not easy to bully. I will let you know that you are just a narrow-minded person and a contemptible scoundrel. As the voice fell, a strong spiritual power was emitted from Yi Mo. The spiritual power was much stronger than the peak profound spiritual sea realm emitted by Jian Menger. Exceptional spiritual sea realm. How could Yi Mo already be an expert in the exceptional spiritual sea realm? How old is he? He looks about our age. How could his cultivation of spiritual power be so high? It was already surprising that Jian Menger achieved the profound spiritual sea realm at 16 years old, not to mention her senior brother. The drill ground was immediately filled with exclamations. Shui Hanxin, there really are a lot of geniuses in the Tianyuan Sword Sect. Bai Chong looked at Shui Hanxin meaningfully. The reason why my Tianyuan Sword Sect is strong is that there are plenty of generations of genius disciples attracted by our rich resources that keep gathering there. Menger is only at the top in talent, but she is not the strongest, Shui Hanxin said. But your disciple's behavior goes a bit too far, right? The moment Jian Menger was defeated, he jumped out. If Jian Wushuang was defeated, would all of your top disciples in Tianyuan Sword Sect jump out to help him? Bai Chong said in a cold voice. So what? There are indeed many apprentices in my Tianyuan Sword Sect. What's more, he is also 16, the same age as Jian Wushuang. It is fair for the two of them to fight. Shui Hanxin said and laughed. That is different. Bai Chong shook his head and said, although they are at the same age, the cultivation they have is rather different. While your disciple gets top resources from the Tianyuan sword sect, including cultivation methods and swordsmanship, guidance from experts at the peak of the Gold Core realm, as well as from some stronger disciples in the Tianyuan sword sect. Jin Wushuang learned all this by himself. How could they be the same? Then who is to blame? It is he himself. Looking pale, Shui Hanxin shot a glance at Bai Chong and spoke in a low voice. Bai Chong, Jin Wushuang has nothing to do with you. He is from Sword Marquee Mansion, and you are the supervisor of the gladiator arena. Even the Sword Marquee Mansion master allowed this disciple to jump out. Why are you complaining? Bai Chong, stunned, couldn't help looking at the experts from Sword Marquee Mansion. They were either elders from Red Martial Hall or alchemists from Pill Refining Room, except for Jian Xinhong. But people from Sword Pavilion were not here. People from Red Martial Hall and Pill Refining Room did not support Jian Wushuang. As for Jian Xinhong, he hesitated for a while. However, when he saw the cold complexion on Shui Hanxin, he swallowed his words. Because he could tell that Shui Hanxin was enraged. If he supported Jian Wushuang at this moment, he would offend an elder who had great power in Tianyuan sword sect, in the name of Sword Marquee Mansion. So he chose to swallow his words. Bai Chong couldn't say anything because even people in Sword Marquee Mansion didn't support him. How could he blame an outsider? Spiritual power at the exceptional spiritual sea realm came from Yi Mo on the arena. It made the disciples from the Marquee Mansion feel stressed. Exceptional spiritual sea realm? Jian Wushuang felt surprised. Exceptional spiritual sea realm is a higher level than Jian Menger's. Yi Mo became an apprentice of Shui Hanxin a long time ago. What's more, he has been training in Tianyuan sword sect with cultivation methods and secret sword arts. His swordsmanship must be more excellent than Jian Menger's since his cultivation is much stronger. Jian Wushuang had already tried his best to defeat Jian Menger. As for Yi Mo, he felt very unsure. However, he sensed that he had to fight with Yi Mo when he saw the icy stares of Shui Hanxin and the complicated expressions from everyone around him. I have no right to refuse the fight, yet I never wanted to refuse. So let's begin. Jian Wushuang clasped his hands tightly, showing a little insanity in his slightly narrowed eyes. Soul devouring. Secret skill. The void shook with insanity. Jian Wushuang's body seemed to become a dark hole capable of capturing anything. Natural power from all things of the universe came to him at a surprising speed. As the natural power poured into his body, Jian Wushuang's spirit raged. His cultivation of spiritual power was only at the peak of the 8th heaven of the divine path, almost at the profound spiritual sea realm. However, now his cultivation of spiritual power exceeded the 8th heaven of the divine path into the 9th heaven of the divine path. At the same time, a piercing pain made Jian Wushuang's face contort. Finally, when this soul-devouring secret skill reached the peak, the pain in his body reached its peak too. His cultivation of spiritual power promoted to the 9th heaven of the divine path at that moment. Grinding his teeth tightly, Jian Wushuang's face contorted. The moment he raised his head, a light filled the void. Jian Wushuang spoke with great arrogance and obstination that resounded in the people's hearts. You are Yi Mo from Tianyuan sword sect, right? If you need to be convinced, then I will convince you with my fists. Chapter 32. Chapter 32, Sword-Killing Movement. Bang. Jian Wushuang sparked spiritual power that could match the exceptional spiritual sea realm. Applying the soul-devouring secret skill, his cultivation immediately reached the peak of the 9th heaven of the divine path. His present spiritual power could almost match the profound spiritual sea realm. Because of the advantages of the heavenly creation skill, the peak of the 9th heaven of the divine path had nearly the same power as the peak of the exceptional spiritual sea realm for normal warriors. What happened here? How did his spiritual power become so strong? All those present were in awe. They were wondering how Jian Wushuang had become so strong all of a sudden. However, if they looked under the floor, they would find that all the creatures within 100 meters of Jian Wushuang had died. What? He is actually retaining his strength. Jian Menger, who had retreated to the drill ground, trembled with fright when he saw the aggressive figure from behind. Jian Wushuang's look changed completely. His ruthless eyes were fastened on Yi Mo. He was aware that using the soul-devouring secret skill did great harm to his body, and the pain in his body would grow with each passing minute. He had to end this fight as quickly as possible. Kill? Jian Wushuang's sword, and the long sword turned into a ghastly force. Ping. Sword light shone, cold and glaring. It was still the first move of the anonymous sword art, Blood Shadow. Jian Wushuang defeated Jian Meng'er in a single move. The extraordinary speed of the sword art amazed everyone, and the present speed was obviously faster because of Jian Wushuang's growing cultivation. It's too fast to think about. Yi Mo hummed with remarkable noble spirit, and a magnificent sword light appeared. What Yi Mo used was the Boundless Heaven sword art. But Yi Mo used the Boundless Heaven sword art in a much more flexible manner than Jian Meng'er. This was because Jian Meng'er had just begun to train in the Boundless Heaven sword art. Yi Mo grew up studying the sword art in the Tianyuan sword sect. They obviously had a different level of understanding towards the sword art. It was still a fight between the giant of heaven and earth and the king of assassination. However, Jian Wushuang's first move, Blood Shadow, met the magnificent sword light instead of going around it, causing these two strong forces to erupt. It was apparent that the advantage of Jian Wushuang's first move, Blood Shadow, was its amazing speed. But it still fell behind the Boundless Heaven sword art in terms of strength and power. After the collision of these two swords, the cold and shining sword light darkened quickly with the overwhelming crush following. It didn't work? Jian Wushuang was disappointed. The advantage of your sword art lies in the speed, but it lacks in strength. My junior sister has been practicing the Boundless Heaven sword art for only a short time, thus she didn't have a deep understanding of it. This caused her defeat. I am much better. Yi Mo's look was ruthless and he said in a low voice, Jian Wushuang, you must think your sword art is very swift, yes? I will show you what real speed is. Yi Mo turned into a flowing light as soon as he finished his words. Wah! Yi Mo appeared in front of Jian Wushuang swiftly with his sword light. Both the body and the sword were like flowing light. How fast? It is so fast. A large group of disciples in a marquis's mansion were astonished. This is one of the 4 ultimate sword arts of the Tianyuan sword sect, flowing light sword art. It is famous for its speed. Bai Chong was marveled in the stand. The 4 ultimate sword arts of the Tianyuan sword sect were all first-class sword arts, so once each of them was practiced to a certain degree, they would be extremely terrifying. As for the flowing light sword art, its advantage was speed. It was so fast that the sword light became many shadows and twisted in the air. It looked like it was being swept by the sword light. Jian Wushuang's expression was very serious. When Yi Mo's sword art came toward him, he used Aurora sword art first. Speed was extremely important in the Aurora sword art, and Jian Wushuang had mastered it. The sword art was extremely fast when it was used. Clang, 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 clang. Numerous consecutive clashes could be heard, but it was obvious that Yi Mo's flowing light sword art was faster. Although Jian Wushuang tried his best, Aurora sword art was only a first-class sword art, while the flowing light sword art was a supreme sword art. It was even known as an ultimate sword art in the Tianyuan sword sect, which mainly studied sword principle. There was a big gap between the level of these two sword arts, so even though Jian Wushuang had mastered the Aurora sword art, he still could not gain an advantage. In the arena, Jian Wushuang was forced to retreat continuously. Then suddenly, a fierce chop instead of the usual sword jab came towards Jian Wushuang. Jian Wushuang immediately noticed. He raised his long sword naturally, meeting the fierce sword shadow with his body sinking slightly, and then he retreated very quickly. Jian Wushuang, your swordsmanship is not so great. Yi Mo glared at Jian Wushuang ruthlessly. If your strength is like this, then the battle is over. Just as Yi Mo finished speaking, a strong sword essence suddenly burst from him. He moved the long sword in his hand slowly. With this move, a huge dim shadow with a height of over 10 meters appeared from behind. The long sword was moving with Yi Mo. Finally, the sword art had matured. Boundless Heaven sword art, legendary maneuver. Yi Mo slashed suddenly with the long sword in his hand. The enormous sword shadow was also wavering. This sword seemed to be able to split the world in half. The strong power left the crowd breathless. The horrible sword essence could destroy nearly everything. All the people on the drill ground were amazed. Not good. Bai Chong was in the arena. His expression became serious and the spiritual power appeared in his hands. He was ready to save Jian Wushuang. However, he became hesitant as soon as he saw Jian Wushuang's expression. Jian Wushuang's expression was very subtle, with hints of seriousness and surprise, but mostly excitement. Is he going to use the 11th move? Jian Wushuang stared at the strong sword light coming toward him. At this moment, a deep awareness of crisis sprang up from the bottom of his heart. He thought about how this sword could cut him into two pieces. But this unprecedented life-or-death crisis made him feel something. In this moment of life or death, he became calmer and closed his eyes. Is this it? Is it like this? I finally understand what it was that prevented me from using this style. It is the ruthlessness for killing. If the sword is for killing, how could I lack the ruthlessness for killing? Jian Wushuang opened his eyes, an onrush of excitement flashed before his eyes, and he waved the triple kill sword. It was the second move of the anonymous sword art sword killing movement. Chapter 33. Chapter 33, Confusion. Wah. A dazzling bloody sword light swept directly out. Killing intent began to emerge and rise. Sword killing movement. Bai Chong stood up instantly, stunned by this dazzling bloody sword light, and said, the second move of the formless sword art sword killing movement. He managed to put it to good use? Sword killing movement? Shui Hanxin was also surprised by this, apparently knowing the prestige of the second formless sword art sword killing movement. Shui Hanxin, hurry up. Help your disciple, said Bai Chong. Lowering her eyesight slightly, Shui Hanxin gazed at the two nearly colliding sword lights in the arena and sighed in frustration. She moved quickly. Clang. Having collided with each other in the arena, the two horrifying sword lights instantly witnessed victory and defeat. What? Yi Mo, with his eyes wide open, found it rather hard to believe that the most powerful attack, with all of his strength, had been totally defeated without any struggle. Then the dazzling bloody sword light, still concentrating all its power, hacked straight towards him. An unprecedented crisis of death immediately shrouded him. Shui Hanxin's figure suddenly flashed in front of him at the last second, and the bloody sword light dissipated with just the wave of a hand. Only complete silence remained in the arena. Yi Mo clenched his teeth, gazing firmly at Jian Wushuang, his heart full of unwillingness. He accepted this defeat unwillingly and helplessly. After all, he knew clearly that he would have died if his great master had not given him a hand. Such a terrifying sword stroke could easily tear his body apart. At this moment, Jian Wushuang gazed past Yi Mo. He was suffering great agony from using the soul-devouring secret skill. Even his face looked extremely ferocious. This skill was far more fearful than he ever imagined. It reached the extreme limit in only a short amount of time. Bzzz. The soul-devouring secret skill ceased spontaneously, and the soaring aura around Jian Wushuang faded away rapidly, even to an ignorable extent. Jian Wushuang could not be more feeble, and his entire body was trembling. On the contrary, his inner unyielding willpower was the source of standing still. When he raised his eyes, the triple kill sword in his hand headed precisely towards Shui Hanxin. Unconvinced? Then fight. The rising sword essence suddenly erupted. It was this moment that impressed the entire audience on the drill ground. They all saw how Jian Wushuang had become so weak, yet the battle intent and sword essence around him never faded away. Shui Hanxin's complexion was pale and cold, she was already overwhelmed with helplessness. Fight back. How is this possible? Since it stemmed from the conflicts between Jian Wushuang and Jian Meng'er, Yi Mo had helped the defeated Jian Meng'er, which was far too excessive. A putative second fight was not only excessive but extremely shameless. As one of the elders of the Tianyuan sword sect and an expert at the peak of the Gold Core realm, Shui Hanxin had somewhat retained her gentility and self-respect. Meng'er. Shui Hanxin glanced at Jian Meng'er with a pale face and stupefied expression. She said, "You have no choice but to cultivate with me in the Tianyuan sword sect from now on, and are forbidden to step outside for 3 years, during which I will promptly teach you all my skills." Suddenly Jian Meng'er was astonished, showing a very complicated look. But then she let out a deferential, "Yes," nodding her head. Jian Wushuang. Shui Hanxin gazed coldly back at Jian Wushuang. "You won today. It only shows that there are some limitations on teaching my disciple, not for a shortage of some more exceptional disciples in my Tianyuan sword sect. In 3 years we will witness another competition between you and Menger. Another competition in 3 years? A slow sly smile crept at the corner of Jian Wushuang's mouth. He looked Jian Menger up and down, then snickered silently. Jian Wushuang himself was deeply aware of it. Jian Menger had been defeated by someone not even qualified to compete. After all, the gap between them was bound to increase because what he had been cultivating was the heavenly creation skill. Silently turning as if Jian Menger had no presence, he headed downstairs slowly. Anytime. An icy utterance came from Jian Wushuang, resounding throughout the drill ground. Everyone focused on the heavy footsteps below as if each individual step was terrifically tough. Everyone could feel how the existing sword essence was growing more and more powerful with each step. Nowadays, from the perspective of the audience, Jian Wushuang was spontaneously endowed with something peculiar. No one could figure out what it was exactly. As Jian Wushuang's figure gradually disappeared from their sight, they were all amazed at the strong soaring sword essence. There were no words, only silence. On one of the top floors of the arena tower, 4 figures stood still. The 4 seniors looked very ancient. The gray-haired leader wore a long robe. The 4 great elders of Sword Pavilion. The senior leader with a long robe was the impressive Elder Hong. On such a critical day, a decisive time for the Sword Pavilion, Jian Wushuang hadn't let the 4 elders down, even growing enough to create a miracle. He had defeated Jian Menger with only 2 months of cultivation. Such an unprecedented achievement was surely a great shock within the Sword Pavilion, even to these 4. However, the 4 elders stood still, more depressed than ever before. Deep misgivings rather than any joy emerged on their withered faces. With a low voice, one of the elders said, "Brother, I assume you see it." Nodding, Elder Hong concentrated on Jian Wushuang's back, his eyes never leaving it. Despite being tired physically and mentally, he still stands firm and tense. Sword essence surges upwards but never disperses. The awakening of Sword Soul, the same as our pavilion master. Absolutely. Once they heard the awakening of Sword Soul, their looks suddenly became respectful and earnest. Meanwhile, Elder Hong looked up at the immense sky and wondered how the previously sunny day somehow now showed a hint of darkness. Elder Hong lifted up his hand, covering the upward universe, and slowly uttered, "Oh, it's about to change." Chapter 34. Chapter 34, Scarlet Kill Command. The annual Sword Marquee Token battle was over. In the battle, the exceptional genius Jian Menger, who everyone had been expecting to win, had shown remarkable talent. However, to everyone's surprise, she had been completely overshadowed by someone else. 2 months prior, Jian Wushuang had been an untalented normal person. But now, only 2 months later, he had become the victor in the battle. Not only did he defeat Jian Menger, but he even defeated Jian Menger's senior brother, Yemo, who had achieved the exceptional spiritual sea realm. A real genius. More than a monster. The whole Sword Marquee Mansion and even the whole Bahui Commandery were talking about him with great relish. In the Bahui Commandery County, an old man in a gray robe with silver-white hair walked alone through the streets. It was Elder Hong. He came to a deserted alley. In this alley there was a shabby wine shop that had been there for years, but no one came here to buy wine. The whole wine shop had only one person, the proprietress. Elder Hong walked into the wine shop and looked at the proprietress standing behind the counter. Without saying anything, he walked directly into the inner hall to wait. After a while, the old woman, the proprietress of the wine shop, came in gracefully. "How long has it been since you've been here, blind old man?" 2 years? The middle-aged woman smiled. "I came here today for something important," Elder Hong said with dignity. "Why didn't you stop by when you were free?" "You are a little ungrateful." The woman said this with a weak smile and then asked, "What's the matter?" Elder Hong took a deep breath and said, "The young master has awakened the sword soul." "What?" A moment ago, the woman had been very calm. Her face immediately became extremely solemn. Jian Wushuang would have been very surprised if he had heard the term that Elder Hong used. He had always been known as Young Pavilion Master, but now he'd become the Young Master. Sword Soul. The soul of the sword ancestor. The woman said solemnly, "I am very surprised that after the master awakened the sword soul, the young master also awakened his own sword soul. Both father and son awakening sword soul simultaneously, That is almost inconceivable. It is incredible, but it happened, Elder Hong said. Although awakening Sword Soul has great benefits, it also has evil accompaniments. If I am right, now that young Master Sword Soul is awakened, people in that place will certainly be aware of it, and they will soon come to kill the young master. Kill the young master? Just as they dealt with the master that year? The woman had a trace of killing intent in her eyes. Yes, so we must act immediately. Elder Hong's voice was solemn, and he immediately drew a letter out from his arm. Go at once and send this letter to the one in Golden Dragon Palace. He must be informed as quickly as possible. Yes. She nodded solemnly and took the letter. She set off without hesitation. In the meantime, in Tianyan Province Qingdong Commandery, in a slightly secret chamber. By candlelight, a man with a purple coat sat solemnly reading the sealed letter before him. Suddenly, the door of the chamber was opened, and a black-robed man ran in quickly. Hall Master, there is an urgent order. The black-robed man respectfully handed him a letter. He opened the letter. The first thing he saw was a blood-colored token. The token had a word carved in clear scarlet, kill. A scarlet kill command. The man was surprised. The organization he belonged to was extremely powerful. People were scared to hear the name of the organization everywhere in the Tianzong dynasty. There were many orders for organizing top-level people, such as the bronze, silver, and golden killing commands. But the Scarlet Kill Command was the supreme command of the organization. Only the mysterious leader of their organization could release it. A Scarlet Kill meant that it had to be done regardless of the price, as long as they could kill the enemy. Even if all the experts who were sent to assassinate the target would die. The Scarlet Kill Command had been handed down only a few times since the organization's creation. Pass down the order. Make all assassins above Silver Mast level come back immediately, no matter what they are doing now. Even if they've accepted a task, make them give up the task or delay it immediately. If anybody hasn't returned within 3 days of receiving this order, he will be killed. The man sneered. Yes. The black-robed man nodded respectfully. He continued to look at the letter. Bahui Commander, Sword Marquis Mansion, Jianghu Shuang. From this day on, we shall keep a close watch over our target's actions. We must not let him out of our sight before we are ready to make our move. Sword Marquis Mansion. It had been 5 days since the battle ended. During the past 5 days, 2 great events had occurred in Sword Marquis Mansion. The first was that the mansion master, Jian Xinhong, had appointed Jian Wushuang as the new sword pavilion master. No one was surprised. After all, 2 months ago Jian Xinhong had appointed Jian Menger as the sword pavilion master. He had been preparing to hold the official ceremony after the token battle. But, during that battle, Jian Menger had been defeated by Jian Wushuang directly, in front of many people. Plus, Jian Wushuang himself belonged to Sword Pavilion. His swordsmanship was unique, and he took over as Sword Pavilion master in a more convincing way than Jian Menger. As for the second thing, it was the great elder of Red Martial Hall. Jian Lan had resigned from his position after the battle and left Sword Marquis Mansion to travel far and wide. This caused a great stir in Sword Marquis Mansion, but it was understandable. After the battle, because of her talent, no one had said anything to Jian Menger. She had followed her great master to go to the Tianyuan sword sect and cultivate. But Jian Lan was a joke in Sword Marquis Mansion, and a lot of people were stealthily sarcastic towards him. Jian Lan had been aware, resolutely resigning his position as Great Elder, leaving Sword Marquis Mansion. It had been a good choice. In the courtyard, Jian Wushuang was practicing his swordsmanship alone. Sword light was moving and it was confusing. For a long time Jian Wushuang stood with his sword. It's been 5 days but my body still hasn't really recovered, Jian Wushuang said secretly. The soul-devouring secret skill had done so much damage to his body that it had been in a state of extreme weakness since then. It had not returned to peak condition yet. Well? Jian Wushuang raised his head suddenly and looked at the yard. 4 old figures came in, the 4 great elders of Sword Pavilion, headed by Elder Hong. Elder Hong, Senior Yuan, Senior Qing, Senior Li, Jian Wushuang called out immediately. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.